Chapter 18 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. CROCKETT. Chapter 18. Bairn's Play. There remains yet one other of their pranks to be told, and that only because it is knit into the story, and so must be unravelled along with it. The pair of elders, after this defeat at the hands of Nell and little David, took counsel together, and might sooner have hit upon something to their mind, but that James, as was usual with him, stood in an attitude of cogitation, having his mouth very wide open. Whereat Sandy, whose wits were brighter and could not, even for the sake of the alliance between them, refrain from dropping therein a snowball which he had ready in his hand for any purpose that might arise. This he did with the same neatness and adroitness with which he would have dropped a ball of worset yarn when the caps were on the green for the game royal of Bonnet Ba. It took some time and a mighty deal of struggling on the ground before this treachery between friends could be arranged. Also much thrusting of snow down the backs of doublets and holding it there till it melted, together with other still more unseemly and uncomfortable proceedings. Then the reconciled allies entered the castle together, promising peace, and fell into talk with young Davie, who stood within the great door in the inviolate safety of the hall. "Do you want a merk?" said Sandy, tempting him with the sight of one, which at that day was great wealth. "It will buy store of peaches and pears, and baked apples at Bailey Underwood's in the High Street, preserved cherries also, and marmalet of plums." Then said Davie, "A merk I want, indeed, as does every one, but you are not the fellow to give it me. Therefore quit your pother, for I know that you would only make friends to get me apart, and so work mischief upon me." A wise boy, David. "As I live, I lie not," said Sandy, taking a great oath. "I will give you the merk, if ye go down after dark to the barn, and passing through the great door to the lesser door at the back, shut and bolt it with its bar of oak, and so return the way ye went. If ye do this, sure as death, I lie not, I will give you the merk." Little David, who had ofttimes been deceived of his brothers, considered upon the offer a while, and at last he said to Sandy, "As sure as death ye might lie, though twice ye have said it. But give the merk into the keeping of Launce Kennedy, that will not tell lies, at least not for such frights, and then I will take your dare, and go shut the further door of the barn." They came up therefore to me to the armoury, James, Sandy, and David all together, and as soon as I heard them coming, I went from the window and sat by the fire, that they might not suspect I had observed aught of their matters. Then, when they revealed the plot to me, I bade Sandy be careful what he did, for it was growing dark, and I misdoubted that they meant to fright the child. So I feared them with the threat of their father, and as little David lingered while his brothers went lumbering and shouting down the armoury stair, I put into his hand a short blackthorn cudgel which the young Sheriff of Galloway had brought with him over from Ireland. "If ye see anything more than common, hit it as hard as ye can with that," I bade him. And so little David passed out. I could not see him far across the yard because of the fall of the gloaming, but on his return, all a drip of sweat and in a quivering tremble of agony, he told me what had befallen him. It was bitter cold, he said, and I will not say that I was not feared, for I was. Yet so long as the door stood ajar, there came a ray of light through it, and my heart was cheered. But presently it was shut to, and I had all the way to go alone. But I heard the cows in the byre rattling at their hemps through the rings, and as I kenned, pulling at the meadow hay in their stalls. And that at least was some company. So I went on, and the frosty snow squeaked under my feet. I came to the great door of the barn. It stood open, vast and terrible as the mouth of a giant's cave. But I thought of the marmalet of plums, and in I went with my heart gulping high in my throat. I nodded at the little fellow, for many a time had I felt the same, and said nothing about it, when I was much younger, of course. "So," said he, "I went through the barn in which was such hay and straw, till I came to the midst of it. Here I stopped to listen, for I could hear a noise, indeed many noises. However, it was only the black rattans firstling among the straw. I felt 1,000 miles away from home, an orphan, and very lonely, nor did thinking on marmalet of plums now bring comfort, at least none to speak of. But nevertheless, because I thought of the taunting and japing of James and Sandy, I took my way to the further door that looketh upon the old orchard. The black cornstacks shut out many of the stars, but those that were left tingled and shone cold. I thought I had no friend nearer than one of these. I was much afraid. Yet nevertheless I shut the back door and barred it good and strong with both bolts, and set a corn measure at the back for luck. This being done, I turned and took but one step towards the great door, through which I could see the snow shining like a mist. Then my heart stopped, and I tried to cry out very loud, but alas, I could not cry out at all. For there was something in the doorway. I could see it against the snow. Something that crawled on the ground with dull, horrid eyes set wide apart, and that turned a shapeless horned head slowly from side to side, moaning and yammering the while. I thought I should die. Then I feared that I should not die before the thing took me, for it slowly invaded the barn till it filled all the doorway. By this I knew that I should indeed be devoured. Nevertheless, I minded what it was you said before I went. So I thought that, having a stout stick in my hand, I might as well die after having smitten a good stroke as not. "Bravo, young David!" cried I. "That is the right spirit of battle." So I took the blackthorn in both hands, he went on, and swung it about my head as you showed me in the hagging down of trees. With that I struck the horrible thing fairly between the eyes. Then leaping over it I ran, how I know not, for the house door, where I laughed and wept time about till Nell brought me here that you might bid me stop. Now I want the merk. So I gave him the merk, took down the dog whip from the nail where it hung, and went out to look for Jamie and Sandy. For well I knew that this had been one of their tricks to frighten the boy, and I was resolved that they should take a thrashing, either from me or, what they would less desire, from their father, who, though a kind enough man till he began to lay on, was apt to be carried away with the exercise, and to forget bowels of mercy. But when I got upon the snow by the door, Sandy came running to me, fairly crying out with terror. He had the hide of a muckle bullock, which had been killed that day, trailing from his waist. His face, in the light that fell from the lamp in the hall, was a sight to be seen. There was a lump on his brow, between the eyes, as large, to a nearness, as a hen's egg. All his face was a lapper with blood, so that for the moment I thought that the lad had really been killed. But when I pulled him up to the armoury and got him washed, I found that the blood was only that of the bullock, whose hide he had wrapped about him in order that he might crawl on the ground and fright his brother David. And I had there and then taken him to task with the dog whip, for indeed he might have bereft the child of reason, but the sight of his own wordless terror smote upon me, so that I desisted, for that time at least. For a while Sandy could not speak by reason of the fear which blanched his face and caused him to hold by my coat even when I went across the room. At last, however, he found tongue. "There is a man," he stammered, "a man with a drawn sword, standing at the barn end in a grey cloak, and a wild beast crouching beside him." "Barley break, flim-flam," said I, for I believed not a word of it. "Your head is muzzy with your carrying the bullock's head and horns, and serve you right had David given you a warble on it twice as big." "No," gasped Sandy, "it is not fantasy. I saw the man clearly. He stood against the sky in a grey cloak, and the beast crouched and held a lanthorn by him. Oh, Launce, I fear I have seen the black man, and that I shall die." "Seen your granny's hippenclouts," said I roughly, for I was angry at his senselessness. "Lay raw beef to your beauty spot, my man. Sleep here with me, and I will forgive you the licking with the dog whip." So by little and little I got Sandy soothed down till he went to sleep on my bed, moaning and tossing the while. Then I set me down to think, alone on the window sill above the courtyard, for I had long since handed David over to the care of Nell. Sometimes for convenience I slept in the armoury, for Sir Thomas had trusted me with everything since I had proved myself in the wars. I saw well that evil was somehow intended against the house of Culzean, and that something terrible walked in darkness. I resolved that I should find out what it was, or die. Yet I liked not stealthy adventure so much as plain cut and thrust, and wished that I had had Robert Harburg with me. But I knew that, though brave as a lion, he somewhat lacked discretion, and so might spoil all. There was nothing for it, therefore, but to go out alone. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of the Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christoph. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 19. Fighting the Beasts. Having shut and locked the armoury door behind me, I stood a great while very still on the steps in the black shadow, for nothing could I see, though I looked till my eyes ached. So I set out with my sword bare in my hand, and my left hand hafting an easily drawn dagger. I declare, if I had only known for certain that the thing which troubled the house was naught but flesh and blood, I had not cared the tickling of a Flemish poulet. For I was growing to rejoice in adventure, believing that my own luck was to win through in safety whatever might befall to others. Indeed, I never loved a leg-lagging, grease-collecting life, like that of a burgher or a cellarer, but rather to strip and lay on till the arm dirls with striking, that is, in a just cause, of course. Although sometimes, if your chief so command, one must strike without inquiring, with too queasy a conscience, like a mere forsoothing knave, what may be the cause for which ye are set to drive the steel. For it is soldierly to strike first, and inquire the cause after. That is, if the man live. But I ride the wild mare whenever I lay the reins of the neck of my goose quill. And since I love to keep the pages even and the lines straight, anything that will serve to fill up the tale of my day's doing goes down. But pleasant writing maketh not always good or full-mattered reading. I stood therefore a while outside the armoury door, and saw only the drifted snow and the line of white roofs against the dark sky. So, having little hope of discovery by waiting like a dancer outside a ring, I stepped lightly down, being shod in soft double hosen without leathern shoon, so that my feet made no noise on the frosty snow. About the house I stole, gliding from shelter to shelter, till I came to the edge of the cliff, where I could hear but not see the breaker waves crisping and clapping upon the shore. At such a time the sea is black, but so much blacker was the night that I saw it not even when I looked straight down upon it. Turning, I made the circuit of the castle, but still found nothing. Then I minded me how it was by the barn that Sandy had seen the vision which had affrighted him. So I set teeth and gripped blade tighter, and took my way to the barn door. It stood wide and vacant, gaping at me like an open sepulchre. I will admit that it required all my courage boldly to go in, for it is hard to enter that which is the blackness of darkness to you, with the knowledge that all the while you stand the fairest of targets in the doorway. But because, as my father had told me, it is ever better to pursue than to flee, I stepped within with elbow crooked for the thrust and a dagger arm cleared of the cloak. But it was as silent in the barn as elsewhere. I did not even hear the rats of which my little David had spoken. I began to think that I had been as needlessly and as childlessly alarmed as he. Then all at once and quite clearly, I heard voices speaking together at the outer corner of the granary. So I went near to a convenient wicket that I might listen, and my very heart and life chilled and thickened, because that the voices were those of our Marjorie and someone else who spoke low and sober, not quick and high like Gilbert Kennedy. Then was my heart full of disgust that I should find her whom I had loved and worshipped engaging in another midnight tryst, and one that might be no better than a paltry intrigue. So angered was I that I stole to the door, meaning to break out upon them in violent speech, caring little in mine anger what should happen. But as I came to the edge of the hard-beaten threshing floor, Marjorie Kennedy came to the door swiftly. Turning in front of the barn and standing with the shawl thrown back from her head, she spoke to the man she had left, whom as yet I saw not. "Remember," she said, "I promise no more than the bare fact. I tell you I choose the grave before a bride-bed, the worm before such a husband." But the man to whom she spoke uttered no word, though he had come nearer to where in the dusk of the doorway I stood with my sword bare in my hand. I could see him plainly now, all but his face, for the tide of darkness was on the ebb. He was the tall, cloaked man whom we knew as the Grey Man. Behind him, at the angle of the wall, crouched a black mass which yet was human, because, even as I looked, it took something from under a coat and rose erect beside the Grey Man. As Marjorie vanished, these two figures moved towards my hiding place in the barn. I had no time to do more than glide within, pull a sheaf or two from the mow, and thrust myself, like a sword into its scabbard, within the hole I had made amid the piled grain. Even as I looked, their dark figures filled up the square of greyness which the open barn door made against the snow. I saw them enter, feeling with their hands, as though to grasp something, yet not making any light to guide them in finding it. Then indeed I was disquieted, and my very bones became as water within me. For if there is anything trying to the flesh of mortal man, it is to lie still and be groped for in the dark by unknown and horrible enemies. I had a nightmare sense of powerlessness to move, of impotence in the face of peril. I knew that when the blind groping inhuman horror took me by the throat, I should not be able even to cry out. It was like a dream of fever made real. A moment after, I heard a man's voice speak in a fierce whisper. "Ah, here it is. Give me your hand and put strength into it." Then, in a moment, like the breaking of a dam, the fear quite went from me. They were but commonplace robbers after all, and I a craven and a coward to lie still while my master's goods were being stolen before my eyes. I leaped out upon them without waiting to think, for I was not feared of a dozen such. "Hold!" I cried. "Stand for your lives, gutter thieves, or I will run you through." I stood in the doorway with my sword and dagger in hand, and as soon as I felt one come against the point of my blade, I let him have it with all my might, for it was not a time for half measures. Then, though I heard the answering cry of wounding, there was no time for further action, for something came at me with a rush like a wild beast of the wood, and the snarl of a springing heather cat. Now there are many things that a lad of 18 or 19 may do, things of worth and daring, but he cannot stand against the weight of a strong and well-grown man when he leaps upon him. Therefore I cannot count it to my shame that now I was overcome and overborne. Once and again was I smitten, till I felt the iron, as if it had been fire, strike me here and there, and though I felt no pain, there was something warm, which I divined to be my own blood, running down. Then I knew no more. When I awoke, I was in the Greaves' house, lying on a bed. Sir Thomas Kennedy, my master, and the Earl himself were bending over me. They had unclasped my hand, and now stood back in wonderment at what they found gripping in it. "It is the key of the treasure chest of Kelwood, the key with my father, the King of Carrick's seal, graven upon it. Where could the lad have gotten it?" Yet of a certainty they had taken it out of my tightly clenched hand, which had been fixed upon something ever since they found me on the barn threshing floor, where I lay senseless in a pool of my own blood. End of chapter 19. Recording by Christoph.
Chapter 20 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. CROCKETT. Chapter 20. The Secret of the Caird. It was, I can avouch, a strange experience for me to lie on my back in the Grieve's house all through the long days of spring and summer. Kate Allison and her mother were tirelessly kind. The Grieve himself generally set his head past the door as he went and came from his meals, crying mayhap something of the day, that it was warm, or that it was a wat yin, and thinking it the height of a jest to say to me, "And what kind o' weather hae ye below the blankets?" For with kindly-natured country folk a little jest goes a great way, and serveth as long without washing as a pair of English blankets. Then in the forenoon Sir Thomas would come in from the castle, opening the hallan door and walking across the Grieve's kitchen as unceremoniously as he would have done in his own house. "My lad, they have made a hand of you, but we will douse them yet for that," was one of his stated encouragements to me. "Let me see the clours. Hoot, man, they will never mar you on your marriage day." And so, kindly and smiling, he would pass out again, walking with his hands behind his back as far as I could see him along the arches of the woodland. Then would Marjorie come to the door and inquire for me of good Mistress Allison. But she never accepted of her hearty invite to remain, or at least to enter and see the invalid. Gently would she ask after my well-being, and being assured of it, as gently would she go her way, her fair face looking so white and sorrowful the while, that I was wae for her and for the unkenned secrets of her heart into which God forbid that I should pry. But that which cheered me most, I think, was the kindness and warm-heartedness showed me without stint, both by Nell Kennedy and Kate Allison. They were no longer flighty and sharp of tongue in speaking to me, but rather spoke freely and sat much in the kitchen, with the door of my room open so that I could see them, nipping and scarting at one another like kittens in their wantonness, which was a great diversion and encouragement to me on my weary bed. And there we had no little merriment, for Nell Kennedy would be saucy and miscall me for my laziness and sloth, also for my lack of appetite, which she called dainty and dorty, meaning thereby that I wanted finer meats than they had to give me. Also, though she was no maid for gossip, Nell would bring me all the clash of the castle town and farm town, all the talk that was gone over in the mill, while the thirlage men waited for their grist. Where she got it to tell me I cannot imagine, but it was all like sweet wine to me that could hear naught most of the day and night but the birds singing without and Mistress Allison clattering wooden platters within. Also, and that was the kindliest thing she could have done, and touched my heart most of all, she brought to me all my war harness and accoutrements. My sword, which she had cleaned herself after the scuffle in the barn, the dagger I had dropped when I caught and clutched the key of the Kelwood treasure, wherever that had been gotten, the pistols, the fine new hackbutt which had just come from the town of Ayr, and which Sir Thomas had given me for mine own, as he would have given a child a toy. "Give the bairn its plaiks then," said Nell, as she laid them on the bed. "Would it love to play with them? Then it shall." She spoke in an enticing and babyish way that diverted me, and warmed me too, when I thought she had so much kindliness for me. So I said, "It is monstrously well done of you thus to divert me." "Hoots," she said, "see what else I have brought you." And with that she took from her pocket all the apparatus of cleaning my pieces and sword, besides the links and buckles of Dom Nicholas's harness and equipment, the sight of which put me in a fever to see him again. Never was anything kindlier done. Also she brought me from her father's scanty library such books as she thought I might care to read, though indeed I read but little, never having been greatly given to lear, save as it might be books of songs, troll catches, wits' recreations, and such like. But amongst others she brought me a French manual of fence, which gave me infinite pleasure. For with her help I could spell out the instructions, and the plates of positions I was fain to imitate with my 2 rapiers, till I had hacked and scarred all the 4 posts of the bed most grievously. And Mistress Allison declared that it was not safe for anyone to come within the outer door. But one day my bedfast practice at arms stood mine hostess in good stead, for which afterwards she gave me full thankfulness. It chanced on a certain noontide of heat that all were at the hayfield. Even Kate and Nell had gone to toss the hay, which is a pleasant thing to do in good company, But a faith, ill enough to think on as I lay tossing my weary body, and cursing the luck that tied me here in a dull room, vexed with heat, the weight of bedclothing, and the broad buzzing flies, which would light on the corner of one's nose each time that sleep was on the verge of flapping down silently with his black wings to bring a welcome shortening of the weary hours. Mistress Allison stole about the kitchen on bare, broad feet, flapping and slapping the flags with them as she carried her cakes to the girdle plate, or swung it from the cleek above the clear baking fire of brown peats. She thought me asleep, for I had cleaned all my arms till I could see myself sitting up in bed, with my pale face and toused haystack of a head in every square inch of them. Kate had brought me that day a book called The Whole Duty of Pilgrims, but finding it full of religious reflections and not tales of the Crusaders as I had hoped, I laid it aside for the Sabbath day as being more reverent and fitting. All at once the outer door of the Grieve's house was thrown back on its hinges, and a great sturdy caird entered, mayhap an Egyptian sorner or bold robber, such as were vexing the realm at the time, or perhaps only a common muddy rascal of the road. "Mistress, I bid you good day," he said. "I am hungry and would have meat." Plain and quite short he said it, even as I have written it down. In this Grieve's house of Culzean even gentryfolk say, "An it please you, and by your leave," replied, with some indignation, the mistress of the dwelling. "But then I will e'en help myself, without please or leave either," cried the villain. And with that he opened a leathern wallet that he had slung over his shoulder, and began to thrust therein not only the scones, but anything about the dresser and tables that his thievish fancy lit upon. "Now, mistress," said he, "let me have any siller you have in the house, and a well-pleased kiss of your weel-faured moo therewith, or else I must do my needs with you." And with that he opened a great gully knife, as though he would run at her. Mistress Allison cried out with a strange cry of women's fear, which I, who had been in battle, never heard the like of before. Just at this moment I pushed the bedroom door open with the point of my toe, and sat there looking straight at the man, with a pistol bended in each hand, and both of them trained point blank on the rascal's heart. I make bold to say that in all this realm of Scotland there was not any man so exceedingly astonished as this particular sturdy thief at that moment. "Drop the knife, sirrah," I commanded, as one that cries his orders in a battle, and the knife rang obediently on the stone floor. "Kick it into the corner with your foot. No, not with your hand." And reluctantly he kicked the knife away from him. "Now, my excellent good man," said I, "sit you down and put your hands behind you. There and thus, be still where you are, quite in the middle of the floor, and not elsewhere." So he sat him down, and keeping my pistols dead upon him, I bade Mistress Allison tie his hands firmly with cord, and give him a settle to lean against. Thereafter I comforted him with stern philosophy. I told him of his wandering and uncertain life. I showed him conclusively how that he went ever in danger of the hangman's whip, and that at the end there could only be awaiting for him a shameful death. I told him also that our overlord of Culzean had the power of pit and gallows, and that, on the return of the haymakers, he should be brought out, when in an hour there would be an end of all his misery upon the Dule Tree, or Tree of Execution, which stands by the great gate and bears meddlers at any season, but only for an hour at a time. "'Tis the most cruel and unjust treatment of poor beset far-wandering men," said the man on the floor. They were the first words he had spoken since he threw down his knife. I wondered he could speak so well. "We have heard no complaints so far," I made answer, dryly, for the man's former insolence stuck in my throat. And in especial the thought of what might have happened to mine hostess or the maids, had I not been there upon the bed with my weapons beside me. So I kept him in torment of mind for a space. At last, as the afternoon ebbed away, and the hour of sundown and homecoming wore on, his anxiety waxed pitiful. He turned and twisted to free his hands, so that the only way I could quiet him was to lift the pistol and point it at him. But even that did not appear to soothe him for any length of time. At last he raised his head. "Master," said he sullenly, but speaking not that ill, "ye have me, I grant, in the cleaving of a stick. Now I will tell you a thing you greatly desire to know. Will ye promise to let me go, and I will never meddle you more?" "I do not mean that you should," said I. "Nevertheless, what is the thing that you can tell me? And when I know, I shall judge its worth, on the honour of a gentleman." "I can tell you," said he, "where you will find the treasure of Kelwood." "What ball-crowned blethers!" I cried scornfully. "Pray, how am I to know that you speak the truth? Ye may tell me that it is with the gold cup, at the end of the rainbow." "It is true," said the man. "I might lie to you, but I will not, for I need my life. It is sweet to me as yours to you." "How can such a life be sweet?" I asked, daffing with the man in my power, which was bad form, as John Muir himself saith in his history of the troubles. "It is not a time to argue," said he, "but my life is as pleasant as the trees that toss their branches, and as the free life of the forest." "Too free altogether," said I, "thus to come in and threaten the life and honour of a decent woman. We must have such freedom trussed and stretched on a tow rope." "I did but fright her," said he sullenly. "That is as may be," replied I, keeping my pistol trained for his left eye hole, "and in any case it will be all the same in 2 hours. But," said he, "hear me concerning the treasure of Kelwood. Ye have conquest the key. I can tell you where the box itself is. For if I win clear this time, I must escape overseas from the vengeance of the Grey Man. But you may lie even as you have stolen, and I fear me murdered also, for by your talk you are one of a murderous set. Of the lying you must e'en take your chance, even as, after telling you, I must take my chance of your cutting my bonds and letting me go." "You have a gentleman's word," I answered him. "And how much is that worth in Carrick this day?" he said harshly and bitterly, "even with a bond to back it." "Mine," said I, with what dignity I could muster, "is worth as much as truth itself," which I grant was but a windy saying. "I believe it, and I will trust it," said he. "The treasure of Kelwood is in the cave of Sawney Bean, on the seashore of Bennanbrack, over against the hill of Benerard." And not another word would he say. So when Mistress Allison had locked herself in the milk house and advised me that the haymakers were in full sight, I caused my man to roll himself to the door of the bedroom. There with my sword I cut the bonds. "Now," said I, "take the door sharply, without so much as going to the other side for your bundle or your knife, and then the woods are open to you, and the world wide." "I thank you, master," he said civilly. "When you go for the treasure, I counsel you do not call on Sandy by your leesome lane." And with that caution he betook himself into the glades of the wood. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 21. Mine Ancient Sweetheart. After he was gone, I cast about in my mind, and for the life of me, I could not decide whether the fellow had been lying to me or not. It was indeed a thing to be wondered at, how this chance scoundrel should know, what I had thought known only to my Lord of Cassillis and my master, that after the fight in the barn I had carried away, clenched in my hand, the key of the treasure chest of Kelwood. Now, as was natural after this encounter, the good wife of the Grieve's house could not make enough of me. Indeed, if anything, she made too much of me, for instead of suffering her daughter and Nell to entertain me as before, while she went about her work, she thought it her duty, as soon as one of them came in and sat down, to leave that which she was about, and come and sit with us for company. Now Mistress Allison was a good woman and agreeable of her tongue, but I did not feel the necessity for this by-ordinar kindness. Yet it was not easy to alter it. Then in the evenings came Robert Harburgh to see me. At first he came once a week, while my wounds kept me weak and fretful. Then, as I grew better, he came twice. And when I was able to sit up, it came about that he would arrive every night and bide till bedtime, so that at last I was almost ashamed to have him sitting there, and feared that he might be burdensome to Kate Allison and her mother. For Robert Harburgh had but little to say, but he ever looked and proved kindly. Also, he brought me many things from Maybole and elsewhere, oranges and wine that had been shipped to Irvine from foreign parts, neckerchiefs also for Kate and her mother. A quiet, down-looking fellow was Robert, something dull of the uptake, and with little to say for himself, but a most noble sworder, and wholly without care for his body when it came to the fighting. Now it seems a strange thing that I, who had so long played the lover to Kate Allison, should be laid by the heels in her father's house, hearing the whip and frisk of her gown about the chambers all the day. And I still loved to hear it, for she was a bonny lass, and kind to me. Also her eyes were pleasant, and had both mischief and tears in them. Not like Nell Kennedy's, that held only mischief and scorn, save once, as it seemed to me, a little while when I was deadly fevered, and when Dr. Lowe of Ayr, The Earl of Cassillis's own physician ordered me herb drinks, and shook his doting wiseacre's head over me like a most melancholious billy-goat. Then for a little Nell's eyes were quiet and sorrowful. But it did not last, for by the time that I could get a scheme laid to take advantage of the gleam of kindness, she was again but mine own ill-set lassie boy of a Nell, and we were throng at the sparring and quarrelling just as usual. But as I say, Kate Allison was wondrously kind to me. Many a night when the weather was hot, and my wounds paining me as though they would break again open, would she sit by me with clear collar water from the spring, tirelessly changing the soft linen cloths. And when the drops of fever sweat stood on my brow, she would touch them gently away, and lay her own cool cheek against my forehead. Aye, and when I put my hand up and drew down her face, she would kiss me right frankly upon the lips. Yet, as I judged, not quite as of old. But I thought it might be the illness that made the difference, for with being sick in body and feverish in mind, nothing tastes the same. And so I thought it might be also with kisses. But after I had grown stronger, I shall ever mind me of one night when I got a horrid awakening. It was a quiet gloaming. Kate Allison and I had the house to ourselves, to which, speaking for myself, I did not wholly object. I lay stretched upon the long oaken settle on cushions which Nell Kennedy had brought from the great house. Kate sat beside me on a stool and leaned an elbow on the oak's edge. She was unwontedly silent, and sometimes I touched her cheek lightly with my hand. It was a most pleasant night, and my mind was full of pity and consideration for her. I bethought me that though doubtless I could have looked higher, I might do worse in time than think of settling down with a sweet and pleasant lass like Kate Allison. It was also touching to me that she should never have wavered from loving me, all the time that I had been forgetting her and thinking of others. But that, I said to myself, is the way of women. We were silent a great while, with the silence that needs no speech, and my heart had grown melting and kindly to the young lass, even as it had been in old days. All of a sudden she spoke. "Launce," said she, "I'm going to be married." She never moved her head off my shoulder, leaning with her elbow on the edge of the settle, and looking away from me out at the door. Neither did she draw her hand from mine, but rather settled it the more kindly, nestling it in my palm. Yet anyone might have knocked me off the oaken settle with a straw. "Married," said I. "Aye, Kate, lass, of course you are going to be married. 'Tis what you and I must come to. I assure you I oftentimes have been thinking about that. There are not the makings of an old maid about you." This I said and waited for the answer of her eyes, in order to laugh again and make my jest. But she did not look at me. I do not think she heard me. "I am to be married on Thursday," she said calmly. "Kate Allison," I said, trying to turn up her head that I might look into her eyes. I thought to see the make-believe in them. But as women know how to do, she evaded me without seeming to be conscious of it. "Why, Kate Allison's sweetheart," said I, "how can I be ready by Thursday, laid here on my back, with only you to care for me?" "I am to be married on Thursday to Robert Harburgh," she said. Then I drew my hand away, and sat as erect and stern as the settle and my sickness would let me, for it is hard to appear dignified and like a soldier, lying on a couch and wrapped in women's shawls. "I am deceived," cried I. "Mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, has betrayed me, coming to steal that which was dear to me when I lay most weak and weary." And I think I made as if to rise, for I had an idea that I must go and get my sword, though what for I cannot now imagine. But Kate Allison gently put me back on the pillows, and sat down beside me, taking one of my hands again, laying it against her cheek, and drawing at the same time her stool nearer to me. I tried to withdraw my hand from hers, but being weak she masterfully kept it, so that the tears sprang to my eyes for very helplessness and anger. "You have played with me and deceived me, Kate Allison," I cried, as soon as I could command my voice. "You have forgotten the old days and all that we were to one another." Nevertheless, Kate Allison never winced, but let me say my say out, and by this I knew that the old days were gone indeed. She was mightily set in her mind. "Launce," she said gently, "Launce, dear sweetheart, hearken, I am fond of you. No lass in Carrick but would like you for a lad and a lover, even for your very faults, which are what all may see." What she might have meant I have even yet no idea. "Ye are perfect for a lad that comes courting, and I liked ye fine, aye, and like ye yet. But I saw lang syne that the lads that court best are not the men that marry best. "Women are all traitors," said I, with indignation tingling through my body. "They kiss and they forget, and then in a trice they go kiss another." "Aye," replied Kate Allison with a little more gravity, "and I mean to have a short word with you on that very thing." She paused for a moment and looked staidly and thoughtfully out of the window. "I believed at 19 that I wholly understood all women, but now I know that when I am twice that and more, the simplest seeming of them will be able to wrap me in her daily apron and sell me in the market for green cabbage." "Listen, Launce, my dear," she said. "I was but a Grieve's lass, and not unbonny of my face, so you courted me. You longed after kissing, being a heartsome lad with a way with you and a glint in your eye. And so you kissed me, and in my youth and folly I said ye not nay. But you went over the hill to the Boreland, and you kissed Grace, and you kissed the lass at the House of the Red Moss, and you thought that I would never know it. And more, you expected that none else should ever come near to kiss me. Aye, and would have waxed mightily indignant and flashed a brave sword had any dared, for that is the excellent way of the lads that come courting, but not at all the way of the men that wise women marry." I was mazed and confounded before her, but could not answer a word, for the thing was as true as if she had read my heart. Where had the young lass so learned the ways of men? "Forgotten your kisses, Launce?" she went on. "And what of them? I count kisses but as the X's and O's that bairns make on the flags with soft cam stone, gone when the game is over." "The homecoming from the fair at Maybole, and the kisses that you and I then kissed," said I, bitterly. "Were these X's or O's? I rede ye tell me." "Launce," said Kate Allison, "we dreamed a pleasant dream, you and I. We have awaked. It is a new day. We wash the night fantasies off our faces and are ready to meet the morning with the sunshine in our eyes. Together we have sipped the cream. It is time to drink the milk. We have gathered the flowers. Let us look to the fruit." "Kate," said I more kindly, "when did you think all these things?" For the lassie made me marvel with the aptness of her speech, and ashamed with her plain saying of things that I had hardly named within myself. "Ah," she said gently and wisely, "the thoughts of a lass when a lad comes courting her are more than she tells with her mouth. For many a kiss is honey sweet on the lips, but bitter as gall in the heart. Yet so has it not been with yours and mine. We loved and we part, even as the wagon of the wind that kissed the apple blossom in the spring when the year was young and glad." She made to rise from her seat. "I must go," she said. "To go meet Robert Harburgh and to kiss him?" "I thought I knew his whistle," said I, with my heart raging angry and disconsolate in spite of her fine words, which I could not answer. "Aye," she said, rising and setting her lips tenderly to my brow, which I pettishly turned away, being weakly sullen, "even so, to meet Robert Harburgh and to kiss him." And with that she passed to the door. She turned ere she went out to say a last word. "And you, Launce, my lad, will also one day desire to leave kissing comfits and find abiding love. And you need not go far afield to look for it either." Thus I was left alone with a heaving heart, and I am not ashamed to say that I wept bitterly for poor Launce Kennedy, who had none to care for him in all the wide lone world, in which he was now so sore wounded and cast aside, like an old shoe or a broken sword. But even as I wept and pitied myself, Nell Kennedy danced in, merry as the morn, and brought a great spray of belated hawthorn to set in a dish of water to keep the room sweet. And I declare I never knew the young lass look so winsome before. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 22. A Marriage Made in Hell. When Robert Harburgh came in to see me in the evening, I was chill enough in my reception. But since he was of a calm temper, though so great a sworder, I might just as well have embraced him, for all the difference it made to him. So I said, without giving him more than time to sit down, for all my days I must ever fly headlong at a thing and have done with it. "So are you going to marry Kate Allison?" "She was proposing so," said he, as calmly as when he had walked across the yard to the summer house, with the hackbutt bullets splattering about him and the guns going crack crack down the hedgerows, like the thumbs of a class of bairns when the Dominie asks a question. "So," said I, "and you were thinking, maybe, that that was the action of a friend when your comrade was laid by the heels." "I was thinking so," said he, looking out of the window at the trees. "Did you not know?" I cried, for I was angered beyond words, being weak and taking ill with the cherry being thus snatched out of my mouth. "Did you not know that Kate Allison was my lass before she was yours? Did she not tell you that?" said I. Now had I been myself, I should not thus have told left-handed tales on a lass, even though I believed with some reason that she had deceived me. "I was not deprived of the sight of my eyes," said he, very quietly. "And you mean by that?" said I, trembling with anger. "That I did not need telling that you had been courting the lass off and on for a year or twa, and that she took it not ill. And in spite of that you made up to Kate Allison when I was lying sick unto death upon my bed?" I asked him bitterly. "How long may you have kenned Kate Allison?" said Robert Harburgh to me in his turn. "6 years or so," said I. "And did you ever in all that time ask her to marry you?" he inquired. "No," said I, not seeing what he was driving at. "Then," said Robert very dryly, "I did, though I kenned her not 6 weeks. And I would not wonder," he went on, as though deep in meditation, "I would not wonder but that is the reason why she is going to marry me." So I turned over in bed, being deep in the sullens, and Robert Harburgh went away, saying only, "Now ye are angry, Launcelot, but ye will find us both good friends, and blithe will we be to see you at the 5 merk lands of Chitterlinty, which my Lord Cassillis is setting to Kate and me." However, as things fell out, the wedding was not to be on the Thursday, nor yet for many Thursdays, for Robert was bidden ride with the Earl to the Inch, his new house in Galloway. Hither he went to set pressure on the country lairds, who were his feudal holders, to gar them pay the dues which he, Grab Siller John, thought had been too long overlooked by his forebears. As the business was likely to prove a troublesome one, he sent for Robert Harburgh to ride with him. So, without so much as stopping to dismount, for the message came when he had been on duty, Robert Harburgh rode away. And if you will believe it, he went without so much as kissing his sweetheart. He leaned down and shook hands with her. But as for me, I marvelled how she bore with that, for to my certain knowledge she liked the other not so ill. Just as I was daily getting stronger, I received another shock, which had, I think, even more effect on me than the other. One morning there came Sir Thomas down from the castle, and I could see that he was full to the teeth with news, for he walked with great confidence, and swung a little stick made of 2 twisted stems of ivy which I had given him, very quaint and curious. "It is all done with now," he said, as soon as ever he had gotten himself seated. "There are to be no more ill times in Carrick, and kinsman's blood shall not flow any more in the west. John Mure of Auchendrayne and I have settled all between us. His son and apparent heir, James, is to marry tomorrow with my daughter." I stared at him, stunned and dumbfounded. "Aye," he said, "it is short notice, but young folks, ye ken, and my daughter would not hear of a great wedding, only what was fitting and plain." "Your daughter?" I said, steadying myself, though my heart was like to break, for I thought all my friends were to leave me together. "Aye, Marjorie," said Sir Thomas. "She is a quiet like lass, and speaks little, but when I put the matter of the marriage to her she said only, 'If it will staunch the feud, I am ready to marry whomsoever you will, Sir Thomas Tode, gin you like.' But that was only her daffing, for, as we all know, Sir Thomas is married already. And even if he were not, marrying him would be neither here nor there in the matter of the Cassillis and Bargany feuds. For my good master never saw far into a whin bush all his days, though accounted by most to be a wise man." On the morrow, which was the day of the ill-fared wedding, I put on my complete accoutrements for the first time. I had Dom Nicholas saddled, for I felt strong once more, and greatly desired to be away from the place. So I stood by the gate as the party from Auchendrayne came in, and saluted them as was my duty. Then I was riding away alone down by the shore road, when I heard in the distance the sound as of an approaching cavalcade. Bridles were jingling, stirrups clicking, and spearheads making points of light, while the white foam went blowing back from the hard-ridden horses. When they rode up, I saw that they were as trenchant a set of blades as ever a man might wish to set eyes on. And at the head of them rode young Gilbert Kennedy of Bargany. So, not knowing whether they came in peace or war, I set myself upright on the back of Dom Nicholas, who was of so great freshness with kicking of his heels in the park, that he was ill to keep at the stand. Nevertheless, stand I did in the midst of the outer gate, so that I should know whether they came in peace or war, and to have time to cry to the porter, even if they rode roughshod over me. And though I was weak, and knew not what might happen, it was a joy untellable to be somebody again, and to gar men reckon with me. But being pale, I fear I made a poor figure to stand in the gate and withhold so many. For during my captivity the hair on my face had begun to grow in a manner that was surprising, and proved a constant trouble to me to keep shaven. "Halt!" I cried to them. "How come you to Culzean? In peace, or boding in fear of war?" "But to wish the Tutor luck on his birthday in passing," said Gilbert, "and then to ride on to the help of John, Earl of Cassillis." So much astonished at what had befallen, and especially at his last saying, I fell in behind him, and the word was given to ride forward. But Bargany called to me to come beside him, and asked me of my health. I replied that I had been long time sick of a wound, but that I was now recovered, and above all things desired action, being sicker far of the doing of nothing. Whereat he laughed and said, "Be cheerful, and if ye want blows, I will ask the loan of you as a hostage from your master." Then, seeing the stir about the doors, and the serving men running every way with flagons and dishes, he said, "'Tis a great stir for naught but the Tutor's birthday. What may be the occasion?" Then, with my eyes secretly upon his, I told Gilbert Kennedy that the Lady Marjorie was to be married that day to James Mure of Auchendrayne. I never saw a man's countenance change so suddenly. The fire sprang to his eyes and died out again like dead tinder. The heart blood flushed hot to his face, and returning, left him pale as a maid in decline. Then I minded how I had taken the matter myself. Yet I was sorrier for him, because I knew that he had loved her longer and better than I. But nevertheless he tossed his sword hand in air and cried, "We are in time for a bridal, brave lads. This is more than we bargained for. Let us go greet the bride and wish her joy." And this I grant was a better way than sulking and self-pity in the greenwood, which would have been mine that day had I been left alone. With that he put the horses to the gallop, and we rode through the narrow pass of the drawbridge by two and two. The roar of the horses passing over was as the roar of the sea when the storm drives up from the west on the crags of Culzean. As we came by the corner of the terrace, I saw him give a look at that window of the white tower which faced to the landward. It had been the Lady Marjorie's, and now was to be hers no more. Then I saw him look down on the fretting sea as it tumbled white on the pebbles and rocks by the cove. And I knew why he looked there, and I knew more also, for I remembered what I had heard Marjorie say after he had gone clanking down the shore in his anger and pride. Yet all the while Bargany rode light hand upon his bridle rein, the pride of his horsemen clattering behind him, gay with the music of hoofs and the dance of red and white pennons. I wondered not that, as they said, he took the eyes of ladies wherever he went, so that the Queen's bower women quarrelled concerning him, till Her Majesty said, "I shall have no peace till I take him for myself." But what would James say if young Bargany were to sing, "John, come kiss me now," beneath my bower window? But more than all ladies' favours I envied him such a brave repair of horse to follow him. For Culzean was too poor, and the Lord of Cassillis too near the bone to keep any such array of mounted gentlemen. For hackbuttmen and footmen with spears were more to our Earl's mind, being better in the time of war, and a deal cheaper in the days of peace, which even in these troubled years were so many more than the days of fighting. As we rode up, and the Bargany squadron halted with a great spattering of sand and tossing of the heads of horses, the wedding folk were just coming out. First of all there issued forth the bride, our Marjorie, the Marjorie that had been ours, on James Mure's arm, he that now was her husband. And behind them came the Minister of Maybole and Sir Thomas, walking together very kedgy and jocose. But Marjorie's face was like stone, though the bitterness of death overpast was gone from it. I trust mine eyes may never see such a look of reproach and pain in any human face as was in hers when she saw Gilbert Kennedy sitting his horse in front of the squadron, upon the gravel stones from the seashore that were laid before the castle steps. But Gilbert only saluted her, and cried aloud as was customary, "Luck to the wedding and health to the bride!" Then ran Sir Thomas to him and took his hand, bubbling over with kindliness and pleasure. The feud is staunched indeed, when I see Bargany once more in peace at the house of Culzean, even as my good friend the Laird of Auchendrayne said it would be. What might be your kindly errand? And will ye not light off your beasts and bide to feast with us?" "I cannot," said Bargany. "The Earl of Cassillis is besieged in the house of Inch by the Lairds of Galloway, and I ride to his assistance." Then she that had been Marjorie Kennedy turned to him and said, "And will ye indeed consent to staunch the feud for John Muir's sake that would not do it for mine?" Which seemed to me a strange mode of speech to be spoken in the hearing of a husband on his wedding day. But I had forgotten that none held the key to the utterance saving Gilbert Kennedy and myself. "The staunching of the feud is neither yours nor mine, Lady Marjorie," said Bargany, bending very gently toward her. "But I cannot bide still in my house at the town of Ayr while a Kennedy of Cassillis, my enemy though he be, is dared, outfaced and threatened by a pack of Galloway lairds." "Are they, then, ill men and far in the wrong?" said she. "On the contrary, they are good men and in the right. But that does not hinder me from standing for my name and house against every other, even though that house be foredoomed to fall, because it is divided against itself." Then he turned to my master, saying to him, "For this one time, and as a pledge to my lord the Earl John that I mean his good, will you permit Launcelot, your esquire, to ride in my company, he that hath so often ridden well against my folk?" "Gladly," said Sir Thomas, "but the lad has been ill." "It is no far ride, and the boy needs but change of air and foes of metal to strengthen his sword arm against." So in a trice I was ready to follow my house's enemy. As I turned I saw John Muir of Auchendrayne standing, looking in the dignity of his white hair most like a saint, though contrariwise I knew him to be that which I will not name. I heard him say to my master, "Ye see, did I not tell you? This marriage brings all good things already, and this is but the beginning." "Nay," replied Sir Thomas, "indeed it is most gratifying and well done of you. Who would have believed a week ago that today Bargany would have saddled his steeds and mounted his men to ride to the succour of John, Earl of Cassillis?" And I saw my good simple master raise his hand and clap Auchendrayne upon the shoulder. Then, for very hate and loathing, I turned away. Even as I did so I saw the eye of John Muir on the watch, and I knew that he understood. For his glance was like a rapier thrust when your enemy means killing. Ere the horseman turned to ride away, Marjorie came down the steps to where Bargany sat his charger, and slipping a ring off her finger, she handed it up to him. "For your Isabel Stewart," she said. And though I saw it not, I am as certain as if I had seen the crest and posy upon it that the ring was his own, one which he had given her in some past day when they had far other hopes than to part in this fashion on her wedding morning. Then with a quick cry of command and the gallant clatter of hoofs we rode away. And that was the last parting in life of Gilbert and Marjorie Kennedy, who had been lovers ever since they were bairns, and had linked themselves together for man and wife with chains of yellow gowns upon the braes of Culzean. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 23. A Galloway Raid. As you may suppose, it was no grief but the reverse for me to ride away with Bargany to the south, and to leave behind me the drear house of Culzean upon that dismal day of doom and sacrifice. Nell Kennedy I saw nothing of, though, as I learned in the aftertime, she saw me. For she had fled from the house, being unwilling to have aught to do with such a deed of cruel wrong as the marrying of her sister, that was the flower of the West, to an oafish lout like James Muir. Not but what our maidie can stand up for herself, and if she gets not her own way, sorry am I even for James Muir, said she. It was from the branches of a thick plane that Nell watched us ride away to the house of the Inch, and noted me as I cantered by Bargany's side. Of which, had I known it then, I should have been fain. For wild ettercap as she was, I now counted Nell Kennedy almost the only friend I had left. And as we went, Bargany told me of the Earl's message brought him by James Young, the minister of Colmonel, and in especial how he had told a great lie to win through the men of Galloway, in which sin it was then uncommon for a minister to be found out. "Not but that my heart is with the lads of Galloway," said Bargany, "but after all, Gibbie Cracktryst is the first of the Kennedys, and I shall not see him put down, whatever be his deserts, by Garthland and the Sheriff. If Cassillis is to go down, Bargany shall go with it, and all Galloway, twice told, shall not accomplish that." Although I felt chilled by the dull, unheartsome day we had left behind us, I can tell you I thought no little of myself to be thus riding in comradeship with Bargany at my elbow. For though I had so ridden with the Earl once or twice, yet I counted 10 times more on Bargany. 40 horsemen were of our company, and mine was the weariest body among them all, for it was my first long day, after my sickness with harness on my back and pulses beat where my wounds had been, so that I feared that they would break out afresh and I have to be left behind. At last we stayed our steeds at a small tenant's house called CROCKETT, a little way from the Inch, where a vassal of Bargany's dwelt. Him we sent to meet the Earl and tell him that we were there, also to bid the Galloway men come to an arbitrament, if so they would. For they had enclosed the Earl back and front in his own house of the Inch, so that none could pass, save indeed one that knew the byways and outgates as did this Peter Nielsen of CROCKETT. Presently there came back from the Earl a message most piteous, for he knew the men of Galloway had him fast, and he was afraid for the safety of the rents and mails that he had with him in silver and minted gold, far more, to do him justice, than he was anxious about his own skin. Bargany was his dearly beloved cousin, his eame, his saviour. He would keep friendship with him more than with any friend he had all the days of his life for this notable deliverance he had wrought. He was to come and put himself in the Earl's hands after he had sent the lords of Galloway about their business. The Earl's plighted word would be his security. At this Bargany gave a smile, and set his thumb over his shoulder at the 40 swords that were riding behind him. "These," said he, "will be the best security that John, Earl of Cassillis, will not harm me when I go to visit him in his castle of the Inch." It was no long season before there came MacDowell of Garthland and Sheriff Agnew to represent the men of Galloway, and never in my life, save when I went as herald to the great house of Kerse, did I see such an exchange of high civilities. It was as the meeting of heroes, when compared to the double dealing and deceit of our break-tryst Earl. More than ever I wished that I had been born on the other side of the score, but it hadna been to be. Agnew the Sheriff was a tall man, with dark hair quickly frosting to grey, a hawk's nose, a long arm good at laying on, and a biting tongue which he knew well when to hold. The Laird of Garthland, on the other hand, was red of beard and brown of hair, altogether a man well set, beginning also to be well stomached with good feeding and sleeping on benches of the afternoons. It was Garthland who saluted first, for he came of the oldest race in Galloway, save perhaps, it may be, the MacCullochs of Ardwell. But the eagle-nosed Sheriff was the chief spokesman. "Greeting courteously to you, Bargany," he said. "This is a pleasure unexpected. Over on our poor shire side, the Erne of the Hills neither mixes nor mells with the quarrels of the Carrion Crow." "I greet you well, Sheriff," said Gilbert Kennedy, "but say your say plain out, without bringing all the birds of the air into the matter." "Plainly then," said the Sheriff, "the matter is this. The Earl has moved the law against us for rights his father granted us years agone, rights that have never been questioned, and when we will not yield to him he uses his influence with the King to make us traitors. He sends his low-born officers to remove us from our kindly homesteadings and from the castles where for centuries our forefathers dwelled, aye, before one stone of Cassillis lay on the top of another." And the fire glinted in the Sheriff's deep-set eyes, till, with his eagle's beak, he looked himself the very Erne of which he had spoken. He went on, "Then comes he himself with a force of 40 horse to reduce the unbroken baronage of Galloway. He summons us to the court of doom, and lo, we come to this yet with 100 gentlemen, and as many more footmen that but wait to be called. We have obeyed his mandate to the letter, whereat he sulks within gates. Then we send him word that we are at the trysting place, and that we will be most glad to see his face. But for some reason or other that I cannot guess at he comes not, but withdraws himself into the house of the Inch, where presently he remains. And we, being bound to see that no ill befalls him within our borders, have set ourselves down to be the warders and the protectors of him and of the castle." So said the Sheriff, and made his courteous amend. And to him Bargany replied, "But Lochna, ye know well that ye have no warrant thus to shut up the Earl of Cassillis, immuring your lawful feudal superior and defying ancient custom." Then spake the red-bearded Laird of Garthland, "If it come to that, we are bound to you and not to the Earl, Gilbert Kennedy. Ye are bound to maintain us in our rights. Am I to lose my auld and canonly office and possession, which I have held in direct line from Uchtred, Lord of Galloway? Of a truth no, Bargany. ye are of a conscience over true for work of this kind. Ye will do to me your honourable duty, as your predecessors have ever done to mine in time past." And having said his say with dignity, the Red Garthland held his peace. I could see very well that Bargany was ill at ease. He liked not the errand he had come on. Blows were very well, but to be process server sat heavy on his stomach. I heard him mutter, "That I, Gilbert Kennedy, should be doing John of Cassillis's dirty work. For none other sake than Marjorie's would I do this thing." But he took up his parable with the lairds of Galloway. "Hearken, Garthland and Lochnaw, if, as ye say, I am above ye, well do ye know that the Earl is by law above us both." He paused for a moment, wry face, as though he had swallowed the bitterest drugs of the apothecary. And I saw the Sheriff smile a smile as bitter every whit. "Hearken to me. If my lord continue to do ye wrong, and will not use you kindly, by mine honourable word, in the hearing of all these friends, I will not only leave his lordship, I will maintain you to the last drop of my blood. But if ye pursue my lord to take his life, seeing that he is sent for me to aid him, I will defend him to the uttermost of my power." Then said the Sheriff, "Bargany, we are honourable men and peaceful. We are not here to attack the Earl, but to defend ourselves in that thing in which he would do us wrong." "I will deal straightly with my lord," said Bargany. "Be content, and leave the outcome to me." "We are content," they replied, both of them as one. "We ken a man when we front him, for we ourselves are men. We will abide your judgment, whatever you may command." So in a trice Bargany had gotten the Earl to promise all good things, and the Galloway men were satisfied. Thereafter they all dined together with my lord in the house of Inch, and parted very merry. And the men of Galloway conveyed us northward to the braes of Glenap, where the whole force and retinue of Bargany's servants and friends met us. Thus was the Earl released from durance, and his promises were loud and many, so that we were all well contented, and I thought that the old feud was at last come to an end. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland of Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 24. The Slaughter in the Snow. But alas, I was never more disappointed, shamed, deceived in my life. For no sooner was our Earl back in his own messages and domains, and behind his lines of hackbuttmen, than he resiled from all his promises, both to the Galloway men, who had done so honourably in the releasing and convoying of him, and, what seemed to me worse, also to Bargany, who had pledged himself in honour to satisfy the Sheriff and Garthland. For after all, a lie told to a loon of Galloway is not like one to a man's own kin and country. Though of course a man that is true all through the web will not tell a lie to any. But such men are few, at least in the shire of Ayr where I dwell, and in Edinburgh to which I have at different times voyaged. But Bargany, as was natural, was fierce in his indignation with the crack-tryst Earl. "For," said he has made me, that am a man of my word, break faith with men of a like pattern, even with Uchtred MacDowell of Garthland and the Sheriff of Galloway." So after all this tangled business, instead of peace, as my deeply deceived master had supposed when he gave over his daughter to the traitors of Auchendrayne, there issued at the last naught but feud, more deadly and hateful than ever. The Earl, who, to do him justice, was no coward as to his own skin, went hither and thither between Cassillis and Maybole, and even south to Auchneil, riding freely as though he had been within his own borders all the time. And the traps that were laid for him by Auchendrayne and Thomas of Drummurchie, the laird of Bargany's barbarous brother, were too many to be told. Yet for the sake of the new alliance, such as it was, Culzean meddled not at all with the matter, though doubtless it was a source of infinite bitterness of spirit to him. Then all of a sudden there came upon us the 11th of December, which is a day yet remembered in Carrick, because of the many brave lads that pranked it in pride in the morning, and who yet lay stiff in their war gear or ever the early winter gloaming had fallen. We at Culzean got our warning from the Earl's man, John Dick, on the night before, how it was the order that we were to gather at Cassillis yet, and ride with them back to Maybole town all in a company. John Dick told us, but with even more than his customary surliness and unwillingness, that the cause of this raising of the clan was, that 2 days before Bargany had ridden past the gate of Cassillis, where the Earl was, stopping not at all, but riding by with pennons flying in despite, which was held a deadly insult to his feudal superior. So Earl John had sworn to be equal with him on his return. It was such a day of snow, this 11th day of December, that even in the midst of the fight, when the hackbutts were talking and the steel ringing, a man could scarce see whither he was going. At times so thick was the drift that when a man struck at an enemy with his lance, he could not tell who it might be that opposed him, whether friend or foe. But when, very early in the morning, we rode out to the muster, the oncoming storm had not yet begun. The air was bitter cold, blowing from the south-east, so that it drove in the faces of the Bargany folk all the day. Now, as of late years it had been customary with him, my lord of Culzean was not able to ride with us, for the chill weather unmanned him, and he could do nothing but hurkle over the fire, with a lad to rub his swollen feet and stiff knee joints. So it befell that once more I had the leading of our good lads from the sea border. Right merry we were as we rode forth, for the matter seemed to us no more than a good adventure. None thought that the issue would be so grim and bloody as it proved. We were but halfway to Maybole when we came suddenly on Auchendrayne himself and John Dick, the Earl's messenger, in close converse, which I thought a strange thing, seeing that Auchendrayne was so great a favourer of the Bargany faction. So soon as they saw us come in sight they parted, and John Dick rode away over the fields, but Auchendrayne came towards us, riding easily and pleasantly as if to market. "A good day to you," he cried. "Whither away, armed cap à pied, so early?" "We ride to meet my lord and to do his bidding," I said, making my words brief and curt, because I liked not the man, for all his fine figure and commanding presence. "Your master, Sir Thomas, is, I hear, laid by with his ancient trouble. I asked John Dick concerning him. Tell him that I grieve to hear of it." "Without doubt you are on your way to visit him," I said, with mockery in my manner of speech, for it was a strange thing to meet John Mure on the wrong side of the town of Maybole at daybreak of a winter's morning. "Without doubt," he answered readily, "but now that I know of his weak state of health, I need not trouble him this day." "There is the greater need, Laird Auchendrayne," I made reply, "that you should go on and cheer him with your pleasant discourse." He answered to that not a word good or bad, but turned his horse and rode away to the right, making, as I guessed, a detour to avoid my lord and join our enemies of Bargany. It was early in the morning of this famous 11th of December, as I have been told, that there was a goodly stir and commotion in the town of Ayr. Gilbert Kennedy had resolved that he would ride that day to Bargany by way of the town of Maybole. Sorely and often they of his faction tried to dissuade him, but he was set immovably on it, as he was on anything to which he had once made up his mind. "Think ye," he said, "that I am feared of John, Earl of Cassillis, or of all the Kennedys of the shore edge that ever scarted other folk's siller into their wallets like slate stains?" "Ye needna be feared," said his brother Thomas, the Wolf of Drummurchie, "but ye surely have enough of sense to take care of your pelt. Even a swine has that muckle. Do ye think that Cassillis and those that are with him have not as much sense as we? They will be standing by some roadside where we have to ride by, and they will have holes cutted out, I warrant you, long or this, to shoot us in the by-ganging, even as we did for Earl Johnny at the limekilns of the Dalgarackies." But that debauched villain, the Laird of Benane, and his little wit sister moved him to that pride, to which also his own heart ever too easily inclined. So in spite of all entreaty, Bargany leaped on his charger and rode forward himself, with only 10 or 12 horsemen as a first vanguard. Behind them there came other 70, making in all the number of 80 armed men on horseback, all good riders of mettle. Some of these were such burghers of Ayr as had a soul beyond the ellwand, and could follow a foray and bend the pull of a pistolet with any man. For I have learned that all townsfolk are not nidderlings, as once I thought in my hot youth and little knowledge. Now, so soon as they were well mounted, there were 2 at Bargany's muster who rode away to warn my lord of Cassillis by which way Bargany should come, so that he might be in array. The traitorous names of them were William Cunningham and Hugh Penangow, against both of whom Auchendrayne had warned Gilbert Kennedy. But Bargany had taken no heed, for he said, "Never yet have I seen the time when my right arm could not keep my head against kings and earls, let alone pock-puddings and Penangows." "Nor like I this day's work," said Auchendrayne, "for I see not here the weight of men to do your turn and carry you through." Yet all the time he was plotting that Gilbert Kennedy should no more ride home to Bargany, and that John Muir should rule the land in his stead. It was not long before they came to the bridge of Doon. There they stayed a while, and Bargany set his fighting men in array. And, as was the custom, he made an address to them, of which I have heard much and often, for all men minded it as the speech of a brave man. "Sirs," he said, so that they could all catch his words, "I am here to protest, before God, that I seek neither the life nor the dishonour of my lord, but I desire only to ride home to my house in peace, if he will let me. But if not, I look to you all to do your duty as becometh men. He that is willing to do this, out of love and kindness for me, let him tarry with me to the end, but if not, let him leave me now at this present." And they all answered, "We will die in your defence if any dire hurt or pursue you." So being well agreed, they of Bargany rode forward. They were divided into two companies, and their faces were set toward the gate of the town. And now it befits that I speak of the things which I saw with my own eyes, and of the noble muster that we of the Cassillis faction made on the knowes outside of Maybole. I mind well how the Earl's spies came riding in with the news that Bargany had ridden out of the town of Ayr, and what joy was in the hearts of most of us that were there when we heard that with him he had but 80 men. Earl John was so full of pleasure that his countenance shone, and he cracked his thumbs like a boy, seeing his enemy already in his power. He rode here and there among us, and saw to it that all the hackbuttmen had good going matches, and all the footmen practicable spears and pikes. When we gathered in the high street of Maybole, the snow was just beginning to fall, and presently it came driving up from the south, so that we had it on our backs all through the fight. I was put in the very forefront of the muster with my 20 horsemen, for save and excepting those of Culzean, and the few that surrounded his own person and were his gentlemen, as Robert Harburgh and others, my lord of Cassillis counted not many horsemen, but rather spent his means upon providing hackbuttmen with the latest species of ordnance. Nevertheless, gallantly enough we rode forth from Maybole, with the hackbuttmen and spearmen coming on foot after us. The street was full of them as far as one could discern through the oncoming storm, rising and falling like the waves of a sea. Yet was our soldierly figure a little spoiled by the falling snow, at least to the eyes of the women that looked down upon us in droves from the upper windows of the houses. But of course a soldier cared nothing for such a trifle. When once we got outside the town, my lord bade his men line the hedges and banks, so that the hackbuttmen might have both rests for their pieces and shelter for themselves. On the other hand, the Laird of Bargany hid few hackbuttmen, for he said, "It is not the arm of a gentleman. Comes a bullet of lead, and be he lord, prince or peasant, child Roland or base craven, there is no difference and no remede." No sooner were we set, all under cover, than our spearmen upon the left and we upon the right discerned the host of Bargany beginning to crown the opposite knolls. And through the pauses of the storm I could see the leaden glint of their spears and hear the words of command. It was indeed a picked day for a grim fight to the death. At the head of all, Gilbert Kennedy rode, behind him the Wolf his brother, and the Laird of Auchendrayne wearing a long cloak, for it was a stormy day and he no longer a young man like the others. Then it was that my heart rose against the fighting, and I had no such gladness in it as was usual with me, all for the sake of young Bargany whom I loved. Yet as soon as I set eyes upon John Muir of Auchendrayne, I felt the iron grow in my veins and the hot anger mount to my head. Of its own accord my hand gripped the spear hilt, for this day, by the Earl's command, I was again to lay a lance in rest. But I had now learned the game and art of it, and took lessons no longer from anyone. "If the Lord prosper me this day, I will make an end of one false rogue," so I vowed, solemn as if I had been in the kirk on a Sabbath day. Then the two forces drew so close together that we could see and hear one another, that is, before the snow swept down, blotting out faces and forms, friend and foe alike. Immediately there began the challenging and taunting, as is ever the way in these clan battles, where every fighter knows every one else, and has met him at kirk and market a score of times. Then Patrick Rippett, that was ever a wild lad, cried out for provocation to the Laird of Bargany's younger brother, with whom he had some quarrel about a lass. "Laird of Benane, Laird of Benane, this is I, Patrick Rippett, that took your hackbutt from you. For thy latest love's sake, come down to the hollow and break a tree with me." For that was his manner of challenging his enemy to fight with lances. And again, "Then for all thy love's sake," cried Patrick, which made a laugh, for Benane's loves were comparable to the snowflakes for number, and eke for the lightness, but by no means the whiteness of their characters. "For all thy love's sakes, come down, and I will gar thy harns clatter." But Benane was silent and returned no answer, albeit the moment before he had been giving Bargany counsel to ride forward at the charge. But Benane was a man, debonair but feckless, a weighty man with his tongue, but thewless and unable of his hands. Long ere this the men of Ayr were keen to be at the shooting, but Bargany held them in, saying, "I will go to the length of my tether in eschewing all cummer and bickering, so far as I may." And with that he wheeled about his force off the nose of the Lady Carse, and went down by the bog side of Diname to see whether a way might be won in that direction, without coming to the bloody arbitrament of battle. But my lord the Earl cried out, "Ware ye there on the left! They would turn our flank and take us at unawares." So he spread out his hackbuttmen, and made them race down the ridges over against Bargany's men, till they won to the foot of the bog of Diname. There on the edge of the moss was a wall of turf, or, as the country folk call it, a fail dyke, so our hackbuttmen, coming to it, first lined it, and then began to fire on Bargany, who was somewhat disconcerted and taken aback at their alertness. I galloped round to the right to make safe the wing with my little band of horse, for I feared we might be suddenly assaulted by the whole band of 80. However, as it happened, the sudden shooting of our musketeers threw their lines into confusion, some of them halting by a little burnside that was at the bog foot. This staying of the charge gave further courage to our musketeers, who had full time to plant their rests and make their matches ready. Our pikemen also gathered at the back of the turf dyke and levelled their weapons over the heads of the kneeling hackbuttmen, so that it had been as vain for the whole company to have charged upon us as for them to have attacked the walls of Calais. Nevertheless, I saw them muster again boldly and come at us. I caught the trampling of their horses as they gathered speed. The fire of our musketeers flickered out here and there adown the line, for it was a dark afternoon, and the flashes could clearly be seen. I saw sundry horses go down and heard men fall, the iron plates of their mail clashing on the frost-firmed ground. Some of those who started most gallantly reeled in their saddles, threw up their arms and fell backwards, while their horses galloped riderless away, for that is the manner of men's falling who are smitten by the bullet as they ride. The wolf of Drummurchie was down. I hoped that he would rise no more, for he was a most cruel beast and the bane of many lives. Indeed, from before the fire of our musketeers, all trained marksmen, the riders of Bargany who had been so proud, fairly melted away. Thus was Earl John justified of his dependence upon powder and lead. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 25. Marjorie bids her love good night. I was just rejoicing that the battle was well over, and that the victory remained with us without great shedding of blood, when to my infinite astonishment I saw a little dark cloud of 5 or 6 men disengage them from the deray, and charge straight at the thickest of us. They seemed to come suddenly out of the mist of the battling snowstorm, for the driven flakes beat so in their faces, that had it not been shed from their armour, they would have been fairly sheeted white in it, as indeed were the trappings of their horses. In a moment more they were amongst us, Bargany himself first of all, with Cloncaird and James and Andro Bannatyne, and behind them with his sword-bearer, Auchendrayne himself. Yet I opine he came not willingly, but that his horse, unaccustomed to noise, ran away with him. By what freak of madness they resolved thus to charge, as it had been an army in position, it is beyond me to tell. In a moment these 5 were in the midst of the slicing steel and the flame of ordnance, the snowflakes driving in their eyes, and their swords cutting a way through the white drift to reach the foe. Never was there such a fight, at least not in this land, for there were but 5 of them to near 100 of us. So that I saw no honour in the battle, and besides it went hard with me to have to smite that Gilbert Kennedy, at whose side I had ridden so blithely all the way to the house of the Inch. But I spurred Dom Nicholas forward with a kind of joy, toward the mound where Auchendrayne had managed to stay his horse just outside the heady rush of the fight. I saw that he meant to watch what the end might be, but I was determined that I should give him more than he bargained for. So I couched lance and crying "A Kennedy" held at him, swinging a pistol point blank as I came, and throwing it away as I gripped the spear. And this time at least I might well have been called Spurheel, for I rowelled Dom Nicholas most vigorously. I came upon John Muir with a surge, so that I clean overbore him with a lance thrust in the thigh. I cared not a jot that he was old, the devil was older than he, and besides, if he wanted not to stand the chance of battle, he might even have bided at home, for the quarrel was none of his. And it had been telling all of us if I had stayed to finish him. When I think of the ill the man did afterwards, and how for years he had been bringing many to their deaths, I can bite my thumb for letting him off scot-free. But like a fool I contented myself with the lance thrust, and the chance pistol bullet I sped at him in the heat of the fight. For I never could abide the cruel slaying of the wounded, which is practised even more in these private wars than in the great affairs of nations. And this over-delicacy has often stood in the way of my advantage. So I turned and left Auchendrayne lying on the ground. As I came back I heard Bargany crying out, "I fear we are too few, but have at them till we die." There was but one that fought with him, all his other companions being stricken down, and in a trice he alone was left on his horse. Nevertheless, it was with a light hand on the rein and a feat touch of the heel that Gilbert Kennedy kept his head, though the blows fell like hail on his armour. There were 3 that he held at arm's length, all the while crying out for the Earl, and trying fiercely to break through the spearmen, who stood like a fence about the person of Cassillis. "Where's my lord himself?" he cried. "Let him now keep promise and come out like a man to break a tree with me." So went the fight of the one against many, and such deeds of valiance saw I never any man do in this realm of Scotland, though in my time I have seen so many brave and worthy things done. For Gilbert Kennedy attacked Patrick Rippett and Quintain Crawford with strokes that nearly danged them senseless, crying at each blow, "Bargany, Bargany, to the rescue, Bargany!" But ever as he raged through the fight like a lion, I saw John Dick watching him with a poised lance in his hand. And while Gilbert was at blows with Rippett and big Quintain, Dick raised the spear and sent it quivering at him with an art which I never saw any man master of, save only himself. Gilbert Kennedy had taken no note of him, for as I heard afterwards, Auchendrayne had told all that were in the camp of Bargany that John Dick was his man and his paid intelligencer in the host of the enemy. The poised lance struck young Bargany full in the neck and stayed. So in the midst of his foes, and striking at them to the last, he fell, who was the bravest man of his age. And at his overthrow there fell a silence for a space, and the battle smother cleared. Only the snow fell, and scarce melted on the face that was already white and set in death. We crossed our spears and made a bier with our cloaks, whereon we laid him. Then very gently I drew away the deadly lance, though the wound bled not much, but inwardly, which was worse. We thought to bear him to some castle of his own folk, as it might be to the house of Auchendrayne. But the Earl John came and looked at his foe and kinsman as he lay on the snow with his eyes closed. "Carry him to my castle at the town end of Maybole," said he, "for that is near by." Now I thought that not the best place in the world for the young man's recovery, but being bidden, it was not mine to reply, but only to obey. We came to the portcullis gate of Maybole, and were bearing him in upon our shoulders, when down the road to the town there came, riding like the wind, first a lady and then a man that followed hotly in pursuit. When they came nearer, I saw that the lady was she who had been Marjorie Kennedy, and that the man riding after her was her husband, James Muir. At sight of us who bore the soldier's bier slowly on our spears, Marjorie leaped from her horse and left it to wander, bridle free, whither it would. But a page seized and held it. She came swiftly to where we were carrying our burden on the crossed lances. "Is it Gilbert Kennedy?" she said. We told her aye. "Lay him down under the gate," she commanded. "I would speak with him." "But my Lady Marjorie," I said, as gently as I could, "I fear that he is dead already." "Then I would even speak to him dead," she cried. "Lay him down." Her husband came up to take her by the hand as if to remove her, but she turned on him in white anger, swift and flaming. "You that have never dared to lay a hand on me, is it like that you shall begin now? Go, look to your father. Cravens that shun the battle ought not to brawl with women in the gate." And without further remonstrance James Muir slunk away, like the very pitiful rogue that he was. I could have kicked the cur, and wished there had been fewer folk there, for I had done it too. Then she that had been so proud and haughty to young Bargany when he was alive, took the fair wounded head in her arms, crouching beside him in the dun trampled snow, while the flakes blew in upon her unbound hair. She crooned and hushed him like a bairn, while we that had borne him stood wide from her, some turning away altogether. But, because I knew all and loved her, I stood near. "Gilbert," she said, "noblest and dearest, never doubt but that I loved you, never loved but you. Though I flouted you oft, and ever sent you empty away, yet I loved you and none other. And I want the world to know that I loved him, aye," she said, turning her face up to us all defiantly. "Aye, and loved him with clean hands too, for he that is dead never knew it. But I desire you that were his enemies in life, to know that I, Marjorie Kennedy, honoured myself by loving the noblest man and the fairest, not that thing there, who by cozenance bought me, as cattle are bought in the market-place." She laid down his head very gently, taking a fine silken scarf, soft and white, from her own neck, and in the folds of that which was yet warm with the warmth of her pure and gracious bosom, she wrapped from common sight the head of him who had died without knowledge of her love. Then she kneeled low down upon her knees, clasping hands and holding the last fold of the napkin ere she covered his face from sight. "Ah, best beloved," she said very gently, yet so that I could hear, "fare thee well. So have I never said farewell before. But ever scornfully, being in fear of mine own heart's treachery. Lie you there that wert the noblest man the sun shone on, of adversaries the most fearless, of enemies the most chivalrous, of friends the truest, of loves the sweetest. Lie you there. Those that hated you were many, but there was one that loved you, aye, and loves you and ever shall love you. Lie you there, heart that never feared aught but God and dishonour and a lie, heart that never took favour from man nor refused one to woman. See, I will touch your lips, those sweetest lips that never of my own will have I touched before. The earth be kind to your body, sweet. The heavens receive your soul with honour, and the angels that warred with Satan and vanquished him stand up at your entrance to give you room." She smoothed the cloth upon the face with mighty love in the caressing of her fingertips. "Good night, dear love," she said, lifting it for the last time and kissing his brow. "It is sweet, even thus in death, to tell thee that I love thee." Then, when Marjorie had done bidding her love farewell, we lifted the crossed spears, and setting them again on the shoulders of men, we carried Gilbert of Bargany away. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. CROCKETT. Chapter 26. Days of Quiet. I ran back to bid Marjorie return with us to Culzean, where at least we could keep her safe. She stood where we had left her, looking at the place where her love had lain. The marks of the crossed spears and certain drops of blood alone remained on the snow. At the sound of my voice she started as from a dream. "Ah, Launcelot," she said, looking at me strangely, as though I too had been dead and in a newer life had unexpectedly confronted her. "Do you think that I, who fear not 50 in the highway, fear 1 or 2 in the house of Auchendrayne? My work is not done there yet," she added. "Till it be, there I shall bide." And with that she mounted and rode away. Never did I see a cavalcade ride home in such fashion after a victory. There was not a man of us from Culzean but went with his head hanging down like a little whipped cur. And when we told Sir Thomas, he was like to break his heart, for he was a kindly man and had ever a great affection for Bargany. And Nell, when she heard it, went out and stopped the boys that played at ball and shouted in the tennis court. Also, to keep them sober, she set them to learn their religion, of which, in common with all in that countryside, save perhaps my master, they had great need. But strange to tell, after the grief for Bargany's death was a little bypast among us, there befell the quietest and most gracious time that ever had been in the house of Culzean. It was like the coming of joy after the rain, the warm rain of pity which thawed our winter-frozen hearts. Yet the things that happened during these months were many. First of all there was the marrying of my pretty, cruel Kate to Robert Harburgh, who had at last gotten leave to depart from the Earl and the downsitting to settle on. So the day came that I had looked for to be so bitter to me, and lo, it was not bitter at all, for I stood beside Nell Kennedy in white, who was Kate Allison's best maid, and it was indeed a sight comely. Then it was that for the first time I honestly judged Nell to be more beautiful than her sister Marjorie, of which I have often thought since. When all was over, and Nell and I had done racing and throwing of old shoes after them, as they rode away together to their well-furnished house of Chitterlinty, it chanced that she and I walked home together. We were silent a long while. Then said I, "Nell, do you remember how it was our daily use to quarrel?" "And so it may be again," she said, tossing her head. "I wonder where the rope is, and the toe-steps that used to dangle from the White Tower?" she asked after a moment. "They are e'en there yet," I said, "if it be that you desire to go and see your lad. But be more timely, I pray you, in your home-coming, for now you have no excuse in the way of sisters." Then I remembered and was shamed. However, Nell paid no heed, but seemed to be thinking of something else. "Nor have you now any excuse for going down by to Sandy the Grieve's," she said, giving me tit for tat. "Nell," said I, "we are very good friends, are we not?" "Ay," said she, dryly, "brawly do I ken the reason of that." "And what may the reason be?" I asked of her. "Just that I am all there is left," she said, so quickly that I declare the saying took the wind from me, like a sudden blow where one's breath bides. Nor do I yet know the answer to that, for on the surface of the thing there was certainly some reason in what she said. "Oh, I am not proud," she went on, "and you and I are good friends and good company. I am e'en content to be Mistress Do No Better." "Nell," said I, going nearer to her and taking her hand, "Nell, you and I are now to be more than that." But she drew her hand away with a jerk. "Try a new way of it," she said. "I am not taking Mistress Catherine Allison's cast-off sweet speeches." So that base little wretch Kate Allison had been at the telling of tales. After this I saw no better way out of the bog than to withdraw myself from her and walk apart in that silent dignity which upon occasion I have at my command. "No, Launce," she said, standing up with her hands behind her and her mouth pouted, "you are a good lad enough, but simple. I knew that I would send you into the sulks. That was the reason I said it. If you take me for a sweet confection that melts in the mouth, you mistake me sorely." But I made no answer, not indeed having any to make, and so marched off by myself. Yet for all Nell's ill treatment and scorning of me, I did not grieve any more for that minx Kate. For, as I was no long time in discovering, the pretty traitress had told Nell many of the sweet things I had said to her. I never imagined that girls told such speeches and love-makings the one to the other. I had always believed that a lass kept her own secrets and only told other people's. It was indeed most true what Nell had cast up to me. I was but a simple lad. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 27. On the Heartsome Heather. Now I must tell during this time of Sir Thomas Kennedy. He seemed altogether another man. He had ever, indeed, been kindly and generous, forgiving and unsuspicious. But during these spring months of the year after Bargany's death, he seemed to ripen like a winter apple when it is laid by, till there was no more sourness in him anywhere. Oftentimes he would come and cause me to read him out of the Gospels. Aforetime it had always been from the Old Testament, which I had ever thought the more interesting, till Sir Thomas that spring showed me other of it, making me read through the Holy Gospels. Indeed, to talk with him and watch his life was better than any sermon. I declare that before I understood his character and thought, I knew not that religion was aught more than the colour of a faction, a thing to fight about, like the blood feuds of Cassillis and Bargany, concerning the wrong and right of which not one in 1,000 knows anything, and still fewer care. Yet for all his increasing gentleness there was naught unmanly about my lord, but ever the bearing and speech of a most courteous knight. He had a great love for noble and sweet music, and often diverted himself on the viol, upon which he played most masterly. The scurril jest, indeed, he would sharply reprove, but his heart still inclined to wit and mirth, and his countenance was constantly cheerful. Specially this was so when he and I, with Nell and little David, rode south to Galloway, where we were to abide a long season with Sheriff Agnew. For Margaret Kennedy, his eldest daughter, was married to the young laird, the Sheriff's son, and abode at the castle of Lochnaw. Now in these days the air of Galloway, brisk yet kindly, suited my master better than the sea winds which were ever blowing about Culzean. And what was more to him than all Galloway was not so torn by feuds as Carrick and Kyle. And a man held not his life ever in the palm of his hand, as a tavern drawer does an unsteady cup which at any moment may be spilled. Nevertheless, my good master found an infinite sadness in this, that in a wide realm of men that are called Christians, I, Launcelot Kennedy, should have come to the years of manhood with no better opinion of religion than that it was the rag of faction. And this too with ministers in mostly every parish, with preachings and communings and all the outer husk of godliness. But during this springtime Sir Thomas showed me quite other of it. But yet I gave not in to all his argument about the kingdom of peace, for I answered that I was his soldier and servant, and that time and again it had been so ordered by Providence that fight I must for the safety and honour of my master, and eke for mine own, this being the sphere of life in which my lot had been cast. I object it not, said Sir Thomas. Defence and the appeal to arms are lawful. But I have lived many days, and I think shall not live many more. Yet never have I seen the lasting success of them that make the appeal to the sword. Truly does Holy Writ say, that they that flee to the sword shall perish by the sword. And as we paced together, he read to me much from his little Bible, and bemoaned his sins and evil life, especially how that he had been overtaken in the house of Sir Thomas Nesbitt on the New Year's night of the attack. I wished that I dared tell him that I had arranged the matter with his host for the saving of his life. But I judged that repentance is no bad thing for young or old, so I e'en let him repent his fill and bemoan as he would. Few places more heartsome have I seen than the Tower of Lochnaw. First, it stood near to an inland loch, where ducks squattered and splashed, instead of being like Culzean, set amid the thresh of winds and the brattle of the sea. Then the Sheriff and his children were well agreed, and friendly with their neighbours, so that it was a proverb that the wolves and the lambs lay down together in that countryside. For if you stirred an Agnew, you had all the wolves of Galloway on your back. But in truth the Agnews were somewhat strange lambs, though their name bears that signification. "We are called Agnews because we have so often been fleeced," said the Sheriff once in his pleasantry. But I told him that was bad sense though good wit, because in the hills we shore not the lambs till they had grown to be sheep. "Ay, well," said the Sheriff, twinkling with his eyes, "shear my son Patrick there, for he is now sheep muckle, and has been so silly as to mix himself with the unruly folk of Carrick." I had indeed great pleasure in the house of Lochnaw. It is a fair place, with walls, moats, and drawbridges all about, very proper for defence, so that there be no artillery sent against it. But to my thinking the mounds might now very well be levelled and turned into walks and terraces, as has been done at Culzean. I sat down daily with the family at table, and was in all respects as one of them. For the Sheriff said, "Ye are not to be strange with us, for my wife comes from within sight of Kirrieoch Hill and likes dearly to listen to the tongue of the muirland border folk." "Ay," said my Lady Agnew, for I will not call her the old lady, seeing that she had kept the heart that was within her young. "Ay, and I have not seen any folk to better them on these fat, profitable runs." "That," said the Sheriff, "was what I thought when I went to the Minnoch side for a wife." And very gallantly he lifted his wife's hand to his lips, like the noble and courtly gentleman he was. And to this day the Agnews have ever been proud of their wives, and with reason. "Hearken to these young folk," said Lady Agnew, as the noise and tumult of much laughter and daffing came up to us. "Hark to them! Is it not good to be young?" "And therefore it is good to be my Lady of Lochnaw," said I, for I determined to show that there were folk in Carrick that could be gallant as well as Galloway Agnews. "Hoot, Culzean," cried the Lady Agnew, "how have ye brought up your squire that he cannot see a well-looking woman, but on the instant he maun begin to court her?" "What!" cried my master, "the regardless loon, and that before her husband's face, too?" "That, at least, is not a Galloway fault, at ony gate," said the Sheriff, smiling, "for Galloway ever behaves itself before folk, and courts only behind backs and slyly by the licht o' the moon." "Ye talk havers, Andrew," said his wife. "Never did I meet you behind backs all the days of our courting." "Na," said the Sheriff, "but your father, honest man, was sair troubled with deafness, and your mother was blind, and lame o' a leg forbye. Haud your tongue, good man. Have some mense afore the young man, for he looks a sober chiel and blate. What should he have to do with lasses, at his years?" Here Nell Kennedy broke out in peal on peal of laughter, and when they asked her the reason, it was but at Launcelot's face when my lady praises him for being blate. He looks as innocent as our grey cat Grimalkin when she has eaten all the fish for supper. I wished that I could dwell longer on these sweet, peaceful days in Galloway, but the spring went on apace, and Sir Thomas was summoned back to Culzean. His nephew the Earl urgently needed his advice, and wrote to him to say so. "The Earl makes you many compliments," said the Lady Lochnaw. "Ay, ay," said Culzean. "Earl John was aye a great spender with his tongue, even as was the daddy of him." So we were bound to ride away from this kindly and merry house of Lochnaw, and much did I desire to return thither. Never once did we speak of wars and stratagems while we remained under that roof, but all of friendship, of lusty daffing, and of leesome love. But when we mounted I bade farewell to all with a wae heart. I envied the Sheriff greatly, for he had a wife whom he loved in age as in youth, and yet whom he knew wherein to be the master of, a thing, I take it, which makes home happier than all besides. I thought within me that Patrick his son had set himself a harder field to plough in his Marget. Yea, already methought he had let the reins slip from his hands, which after all is no strange thing, considering that she was own sister to Marjorie and Nell Kennedy, of whose stiff necks I had oft had experience. Ere we went, the Sheriff said a word that amused us all. "When I came to be Sheriff," he said, "I found my father at the horn, outlaw and rebel, for refusing to pay tens to cover the back of a bishop's lady with silks and satins. And when I die it looks like that I shall see my son at the horn for cleading of his wife according to the degree of a queen. For young Patrick Agnew liked better than all to be forever gadding about after the merchants of France and the Low Countries, who knew his weakness so well that they would come from far to sell him stuff for the decking of his lady, who, when all was said and done, was nothing to compare to Nell or even to Marjorie, her younger sisters. So we departed, almost heartbroken, to leave the sweet place of Lochnaw. And the Sheriff rode with us to the village of Stranrawer, a long, clarty, Irish-looking street with pigs and bairns running about it, set on the shore of a fine loch. Here Sir Andrew and his retinue bade us farewell, and so turned them and rode away back to the homely steading of Lochnaw. Now upon our homeward journey it was the great good pleasure of the knight, my master, that we should ride up the Minnoch Glen to visit my father and mother, whom I had not seen for long. Sir Thomas put it that it would be well that we rode not directly by Ardstinkar and near to Bargany along the shore road, for the folk of Bargany were cruelly set against us. Nevertheless, I knew that the real reason was that he wished me to see my mother. So we struck across the moorland country of Wigtonshire to the head of the Loch of Cree, which is a vast, wild, swampy place where many waterfowl congregate, and where duck and seagull build their nests. As we breasted the swelling moors we came in sight of the mountains that were dear to me, for I was hill-bred and loved them, so that I could have ridden on, carolling like a lark, had I been in any other company. But Sir Thomas and Nell knew what was in my heart, for as we rode up Minnoch they looked at each little thatched cot house, and asked what it might be called, which was most amiable of them, for I loved to tell over the well-kenned names, though the hearing of them could not possibly have pleasured Nell or her father. When we came to the brow of the hill, along the side of which runs the track to the rowan tree, I begged of them that I might ride a little way in front, in order to prepare my father and mother for their reception. Really, I went because I did not wish them to see me meet my mother, for I knew that I was bound to weep. But it fell not out as I had expected, for the dogs that were about the farm came barking and youching round the corner, and I saw the rough head of our herd laddie looking out of the barn. Then he scudded across the yard like a hare, and anon there came my mother forth, with a white hood upon her head, and girt about with her apron, even as she had been when, as a boy, I used to come pelting home from the hills, hungrily looking for a piece and a slockening drink of milk. So she came own the little loaning to meet me, nearly running in her eagerness, I declare. And there, at the gate slap, I leaped down from Dom Nicholas and took my mother about the neck, greeting like a great silly bairn. But for my life I could not help it. Yet I need not have cared, for Nell and Sir Thomas were admiring something on the hills, with their heads close together, and over my shoulder I could hear him pointing out to her the road to Straiton, and the way across the hills to Girvan, so they observed not my weakness. Then came Sir Thomas forward, and I presented him to my mother. Whereupon he greeted her by the name of Lady Kirrieoch, for that was a title of courtesy to a laird's wife. And though Kirrieoch is but a little place and a wild uncouth holding, yet Sir Thomas walked by my mother's side, leading his horse and talking, with his hat in his hand all the while, as if she had been the Queen of Scots herself. And as I looked steadfastly away towards the wind, so that they should not see that I had been weeping, and also to let the air dry my eyes, for such weakness is ridiculous in a man, Nell came riding by on her palfrey. She cast a little glance about her to see that none observed, a look quick and timorous. Then she leaned over and gave me a light little pat on the cheek with her hand, a thing she never did before, but which I liked very well. Then came out my father to meet us at the door, and Sir Thomas took him by the hand heartily. "You and I, Laird," he said, "are not so young as we were at the King's muster on the Boroughmuir, and when you held the colours of Cassillis, even as your son does this day." "No, Sir Thomas," said my father. "Brittle bones, slack sinew, thin sown hair have come to us both since that day, when it was my good fortune to serve with you and under you." "Ah, Kirrieoch," replied the Tutor of Cassillis, "I envy you here on your high and heartsome muirs, where the wild cats are your greatest enemies, and not more dangerous than the erne ever stoops to slay." "It is a gey hard struggle at times," replied my father, with Launcelot away and only 2 old bodies left with the serving men. "Ah, bide a wee," said the Tutor. "I have made it my business to see that in a little, when the lad has won his spurs, you shall have Launcelot back with something worthwhile in his pouch, and a handle to his name as good as the lave of us." "I am glad that you have such good reports to give of him," said my mother. "Oh," said the Tutor of Cassillis, drolling, "I am none so sure of that. He has enough conceit of himself indeed, but in his presence we will not say more." And then my mother set the table for us with her own hands, though Sir Thomas insisted that she should not. But with all due acknowledgment of his courtesy, my mother continued the work with dignity and grace. Besides which, I question whether at the moment Susan, the byre lass, was dressed fitting to come into a room where there was the company of great folk. But it was more than pleasant to see Nell rise to help my mother to spread the cloth and lay out the silver spoons. We had the best of muirland fare, mutton of the sweetest, black-faced and small, toothsomely fed on the sweet, tender grasses that nestle among the heather knowes. Also we had sweet milk, oaten cake of a rare crispness, a kebbuck of rich cheese, and butter, as the Scriptures say, in a lordly dish, for the vessel was of silver, and had upon it the ancient arms of the Kennedys. The Tutor picked it up and looked at it. "These are the bearings of my great-grandfather," he exclaimed, much astonished. "Yes," said my father, "and he was also my grandfather." "Bless me," cried the Tutor of Cassillis, "I knew not that we were so nearly related." And all through the remainder of our stay he called my father cousin. And as for Mistress Nell, there was no end to her merriment on the subject. "Now we shall fight more than ever," she said, "for we Kennedys always fight with our cousins. And I must find the handle of the hay-rake with which I used to beat my cousin Philip. It will serve excellently for drubbing Launcelot, my new sweet coz." At last we rode away, and Nell Kennedy kissed my mother lovingly when we bade farewell, so that my heart warmed more than ever to the lass. Way-heartedly enough we left the little white housie behind us, sitting blithesome on its brae above the white stones of the burn. And in my imagination, to this very day, whenever I am away from the Minnoch for long, rises a clear picture of the waterside as we saw it that morning, a wide valley filled to the brim with sunshine and the stir of breathing airs, the whaups and pea-sweeps beginning to build, and keeping up all the time above our heads a brave welter of crying and the whistle of eddying wings. "I wonder not that sometimes you grow homesick," said Nell Kennedy. "When you are distracted and morose, I shall now know the reason." So we came in due season to the house of Culzean, and there we found all well, with James playing tennis contentedly in the court, and Sandy up at the stables, acting the big man and giving his orders as large as my lord. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. CROCKETT. Chapter 28. Warm Backs Make Braw Bairns. It was the morning of the 11th of May, and we were on the morrow to take our journey to the town of Edinburgh. I had advertisement the night before that I was to ride to the town of Maybole to meet John Muir of Auchendrayne, and on my master's account to appoint a tryst with him at the Duppel, not far from the town of Ayr, for my lord desired not to pass through that place, knowing that many of the faction of Bargany abode there. But Sir Thomas ever believed that Auchendrayne was of those that wished him well, because of the marriage and of all that had passed between them. So I had to ride on this mission that I loved not over well, But I had naught to say, for whenever I spake to the tutor concerning John Mure, he would clap me on the head and say, "Ye are over careful and suspicious, Launcelot. John Mure and I are fathers of the same pair of bairns, wherefore then should we not be as one, even as they?" Poor man, I could not find it in my heart to tell him of the happening beneath the town gate of Maybole, when James Mure's wife bade farewell to Gilbert Kennedy of Bargany as he lay there dead on his enemies' spears. So at early morning I rode as I was bidden to Maybole to meet the Laird of Auchendrayne, who, as my master knew, had some business there. But it so fell out that I missed him, for he had lodged all night in the town at the Black House, which belongs to one Kennedy of Knockdon, a friend of his and of the Laird of Newark's. I was loath to ride all the way after him to Auchendrayne, and so bethought me that I should get the loan of a laddie from my crony, Dominie Mure, out of his school at the foot of the Kirkwynd. My way led me by the green, where it was sorely in my mind to try a stroke of the ball. But I remembered me that Sir Thomas bade me be soon back, that I might be ready to ride with him on the morrow's morn to the town of Edinburgh by Duppel and the ford of Holmstone. So, though I saw some brisk birkies looking at the ball, one of them being lay-nosed Jamie Crawford, that had his nose flattened with the stroke of a golf ball on the hills of Ayr, I refrained me for that time and went to seek a boy. But I saw none on the green, saving some raggedy loons playing kickball, whom I did not like to trust with so important a message. I went on, therefore, to the schoolhouse. And as I went, it cheered me to think on Dominie Mure and his humours, for he and I had been gossips of a long season. The schoolhouse of Maybole was a curious building tacked on to the rear of the kirk, with vaulted passages of timber, in which were doors which could on occasion be opened, so that the school itself might be used as an addition to the kirk should the latter be crowded. But in my time the space was but seldom in demand. It was an age of iron, and men's minds craved not naturally that which was peaceable and good. The old papistry had passed away, but the new religion had not yet grown into the hearts of the people. I came to the schoolhouse door. The noise of conning lessons that used to go humming all along the kirk vennel was louder than it was wont to be. Indeed, I thought that of a surety Dominie Mure had gone as far as the change house for his morning glass of strong waters, wherein I did that worthy man an injury. The Dominie's Highland pipes lay on the desk before him, the great drones looking out like eyes at the scholars. They were the recreation of his leisure, for he had been in his youth in the savage north, and had learned to be no ill-considered performer, even in the country of pipes and pibrochs. I looked within, and there, mounted upon two desks and a chair, stood the Dominie, with his head through a round hole in the boards of the roof, and all that one could see of him convulsed with animation. The bairns below were in a great consternation, crying out that this one and that other was misbehaving, that Robin Gibb was pinching, or that Towhead Kennedy was in the act of some piece of villainy which remained unexpressed, for the obvious reason that the heavy hand of Towhead Kennedy had prisoned the information within the mouth of the talebearer. The school of Maybole was an apartment nearly square, with a dark, well-hacked oaken writing desk running round two sides of it, and benches set crossways on the floor, where, when the peace was undisturbed by internal war, the bairns conned their tasks from worn copies of the Bible. At the far end of the school was a wooden bar a foot from the floor, and a little behind it another. This was called the hangman, for it was the post of judgment to unruly boys, who were called upon to kneel over the first bar and grasp the second, thus putting themselves into a proper position for the operations of the fiery and untender little Dominie. The desk of the master had a framework behind it, in which were half a dozen birch rods, carefully kept and oiled, even as I keep my stands of arms, for the callants of Maybole have ever been unruly, and so remain to this day. Dominie Mure was in stature the least, but in learning, I can well believe, the greatest of dominies, for he was never without 2 or 3 scholars in the Latin. It was whispered by the malicious that he had been trained for a clerk in the old days of the Roman Church, but made a false step, and so had to turn dominie. Taking the words at their usual meaning, I utterly condemn and reject this lying, malicious explanation, for Dominie Mure was the least handsome man in Carrick. He was little, scarce bigger than many boys of 12 and 14 who sat in his class in the New Testament, which was naturally the class beneath the Old Testament. His hair grew all over his head and face, grey, wiry and rough, like burned heather. Out of this tangle a pair of humoursome eyes looked, and a stout nose projected like the angle of an overgrown and ruined building. His arms were long, and so strong that he could lift any lad in the school into the air with one of them, while he gave him a paikie with the other. So fierce and fiery was the little man, that no one of the great stalwart loons who came in the winter time dared to try their pranks upon him. He would fly at them swift as the wild cat springs, and beat half a dozen black and blue before they had time to rally. What he was now doing with his head through the ceiling I could not well imagine, but there was a great noise aloft and a rushing of feet, while the master made desperate dives hither and thither, like a man in deep water and not well able to swim. Beneath, one little rascal of a bare-legged loon rose from the seat where he had been sitting squirming at his copy. "The Dominie is lost!" he cried in great pretended alarm. "Oh, sirs, where is our Dominie? Look in the inkhorns, lassies! Look in a' your pouches, laddies!" And so all the ill-set vagabonds rose and began to search the inkhorns, the dinner wallets, and even in the rat-holes for the master. But at this moment there was a crash, and first one and then another pair of legs appeared dangling through the ceiling, wildly kicking. The head of the Dominie returned through the hole in the ceiling, and he cautiously descended. His face was damp with perspiration from his exertions aloft, and he had the longest and stoutest birch rod, which was of the thickness of one's forefinger, in his hand. There was a great streak of soot across his nose, which indeed was about all that there was for it to cross, the rest of his face being but a grey tangle of hair. Dominie Mure came forward to where I stood by the door. He greeted me right heartily, and not the less when I told him on whose account I was there, for he had often been summoned over to drink a pint with Sir Thomas at the inn or in his own town house, because my master ever loved all learned men. "Bide a wee," he said, "till I attend to these rascal loons. They climbed up through the hole in the ceiling, when I was at Deacon Gilroy's funeral, to get the store of balls, knuckle-bones, chucky-stones, and other things the bairns throw up there. I kenned well they would fall through." So the Dominie took a much thinner and suppler bundle of birch, gave it a draw through his hand and a swish or two in the air, which made the dangling legs kick more wildly than ever. It might be with pleasure, and it might be with painful anticipation. Dominie Mure walked to the place and set a chair for himself to stand upon. "Wha belongs thae legs?" he asked of the scholars. "They are Tammy Nisbet's," said the school with one voice. "We ken by his duddy breeks." "And whose limbs are these? To whom do these legs belong?" he continued, pointing to certain red objects that twinkled in frantic endeavours to be free. "Jock Harrison's," answered the school, without a moment's hesitation. "They are clouted wi' his mither's old petticoat." Then the master did his office affectionately upon those parts of Tommy Nisbet and Jock Harrison which of their own accord the adventurous loons had exposed. The thwacks resounded through the school, but the yells mostly ascended through the roof. Then, when he had finished his pleasure, for I saw by his eye it was no unwelcome task, he put up an arm, and without circumspection pulled the squirming urchins through the rotten boards. "Thomas Nisbet," he said severely, "your father is an householder. He shall pay for the damage done to the ceiling of this school, which is the property of the session of the parish, of which I am clerk. And your father can take the price out of your breeks himsel' at his leisure." He then hauled the other down in the same manner. "Jock Harrison, I'll never trouble your poor mither about the siller for the repairs. She has enough to do with 10 like you. But I'll e'en pay your herdies the noo, and quit your mother and you too at the one settlement." Which having done, he laid down his bundle of rods, dusted his hands, and commended himself to me to know how, and in what manner, he might serve my master. I told him that if he would write a letter to John Mure of Auchendrayne to bid him meet with Sir Thomas at the chapel of St. Leonard's, by the sandhills of Ayr, on the morrow's morn at 10 of the clock, and send it to Auchendrayne by one of his most trustworthy lads, it would be no small obligation. And furthermore that I would await an answer here in Maybole, having other business to transact. "Good faith, Master Launcelot, I will do that, and gladsomely," said the little Dominie. So, having brought the school to order and set the classes to their work, he squared himself at his desk, and wrote fairly and elaborately as I told him. For the little man prided himself on his penmanship, which indeed Sir Thomas ever said was better than that of any law scrivener in Edinburgh. I reminded him of this, and Dominie Mure could hardly contain himself for pride. How strange that so small a thing should set up some men. Then, when he had finished, and addressed it in the Italian manner, he called out, "William Dalrymple, come hither." And from the close-built ranks of the old scholars at the wall-desks, a plump-faced ruddy boy arose. "This," the Dominie said, "is the son of a widow woman, and a steady lad that will truly do your message and bring you word again without delay or falsehood. He is called for a nickname Willie Glegfeet." So to William was delivered the letter, and sundry copper coins for running the errand. Whereupon he took up the vennel, and through the High Street on the way to Auchendrane like a hunted hare, for as his name imports, he was wonderfully nimble of his feet. Having thus delivered my message, I thanked the Dominie very heartily, and went to the play of the golf green till a messenger should return. I had an excellent game, but not playing with mine own clubs I was beaten, though not at great odds, by the young Laird of Gremmat, whose chin was hardly yet better of the cleaving it got on the fatal day at the Lady's Carse. But this interfered not with his putting. Now gaming on the green is uncommonly fretting to the temper, and more especially when you are losing with a man like Gremmat, who cries and shouts at every good stroke of his own, and dispraises yours. Yet owing to the well-kenned equality of my temper, and also because he was not yet fully recovered of his wound, I did not clout him over the sconce with my cleek, as I certainly was in a great mind more than once to do. We were yet hard at it, and the afternoon wearing on apace, when I saw the little Dominie coming toward us with the boy William Dalrymple by his side. The schoolmaster held the letter in his hand, and gave it back to me. William Dalrymple says that he found not the Laird of Auchendrane in his own house, and has therefore brought back the letter. I looked at it a moment, turning it over in my hand. "It has been opened," said I. "See, the wax is gone, and there are finger marks within." "So indeed it has," said Dominie Mure. "Boy, if you have opened it I will tan you alive, outside and in." Whereat the boy began to weep. "I have said what I was told to say," he cried. "Nothing more could we get out of him, save that a dark man, faced like an ape or a wild beast, had come some way home behind him and sorely terrified him." So we sent the boy back to his mother, and bidding farewell for that time to the Dominie and to young Gremmat, I fared along the way to Culzean to make me ready for the long journey of the morrow. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 29. The Murder Among the Sandhills. It was a broad day and a pleasant May morn when my master and I said our farewells at the gate of Culzean. With my own hands I had saddled for Sir Thomas his war horse, but he, coming down arrayed in his plain suit of dark Flemish cloth, bade me take him back to the stable and get instead a pacing palfrey, which he loved because Marjorie had used to ride it. Then he kissed his bairns, for the lads and Nell stood by the door on the landward side, watching us with earnest eyes. "Keep the castle, James," he cried, "till I come back." "Ay," said Sandy, "we will keep it for you, feyther." For Sandy came ever to the forefront, setting himself naturally before the slow and quiet Jamie. Then Nell came near and kissed her father. But she and I only looked the one at the other as friends look, for at least before folk we did not so much as touch hands. So down through the woods Sir Thomas and I went sedately and quietly, now into little collar blinks of morning sunshine which glinted straight and level between the trees, and anon coming out upon a bare knoll as into a room with a removed and spacious ceiling. For there at our feet was the plain of the sea, sparkling and blue, beyond it again the hills of Arran, and to the south the shoulder of the Craig of Ailsa, heaving its bulk skyward like a monster of the ocean stranded in the shoreward shallows. Very pleasant was my master's discourse as we went, of the wonderful peace that he was going to bring upon the land of Carrick from his dealings with the King and Council in Edinburgh. Specially he spoke with thankfulness of the present friendship of Auchendrane, of the young Bargany who should for long be under tutors and governors, and of our own Earl, now tired of the feud and eager for a lasting peace. "It needs," said he, "but that one should take on him all the burden and heat of the day, and carry the matter through. And I, that am no warrior, but a quiet man dwelling in my own house, and fit only for daunering about mine own fields, may be able to do more in the matter than many battalions. For I have some influence with the King, a man that loves grave discourse upon occasion." So pleasantly talking together in this fashion, speaking ever the kindliest things of the enemies of his house, and all the time making many excuses for them, Sir Thomas kept his palfrey at the amble. Presently we came to the castle of Greenan, which stands on a sea crag, and looks right bravely over the Bay of Ayr and down upon the little tower thereof. It belongs to Kennedy of Balterson, a gossip and well-wisher of Culzean's. Now, said my master, I must see if Balterson is at home. I think truly that he is, for there is a reek coming up very freely from the loom. Now John was ever a big eater and a long lier abed in the mornings. What a pleasantry if I should raise him from between the blankets. It would be a great cast-up all the days of his life. So we lighted down in front of the castle yet. I tied the horses together and walked about the cliff edge, looking out to sea and over the sands of Ayr, thinking of many things. Mostly my thoughts ran on the treasure of Kelwood, and whether I should ever win it. Of Nell too, and what she meant by patting me on the cheek when we met my mother. Of the tutor's words to my father that one day I should have a handle to my name, and a down-sitting as good as any. Plenty of pleasant things I had to think about that collar morn in May, as indeed a young man of spirit ought to have. And it was not very long before Sir Thomas came forth arm in arm with John Kennedy of Balterson, a grave and portentous man of heavy figure, richly arrayed, more like the provost of a town than a country laird. And these two paced up and down the narrow terrace walk of Greenan Castle, turning and returning, wheeling and countering as on the quarter-deck of a ship. But of the matter of their discourse I know nothing, though I guessed it to have been concerning the making up of peace between the feudal enemies in the lands of Carrick and Kyle. It was near to 10 of the clock, and already close upon the time which had been appointed for the tryst with Auchendrayne, that we mounted at the yett of Greenan to ride on our way to Holmeston Ford. "Sorry am I," said my master, "that I have not spoken a word with John Mure ere I go. But I know his loving desire for my success, and he well knows my affection for him." We rode down from the castle crag of Greenan, and presently came out upon the links. These are here all sandy, cast up into rounded mounds and hills, and bitten into by the little pits and dungeons, called of them that play at the golf, bunkers. "Launcelot, ride a little way in front. It approaches the hour of noon, and I would do my devotion and meditate a little alone," said Sir Thomas to me. So I drew myself a bowshot before him, riding upon Dom Nicholas, and taking my hat in my hand. I rode easily, enjoying the sea breeze that cooled my brow and tossed my hair. I wondered if ever the time would come when I also should be thinking about my religion at noon of a fine heartsome day. It seemed a strange time enough for a hale, well-to-do gentleman to set to his prayers. Presently I saw a man standing upon my right hand, somewhat above me upon the crown of a sandhill. And he raised his hand as one that cried to clear the course in the game, so I thought no more of the matter. But I looked round, thinking perchance that he cried to my master, who was riding with bared head, and holding his little red Testament in his hand. Suddenly, even as I looked at him, I heard the sound of shots behind me, and turning Dom Nicholas, I saw my master reel in the saddle, with white blowing puffs of gunpowder rising all about him, from behind the desolate sandhills among which the murderers had hidden themselves. Drawing my sword, I set spurs to the sides of Dom Nicholas and galloped towards them. I was aware, as I rode, of my master lying on his back on the sand, and his palfrey galloping away with streaming mane. A little black crowd of men stood and knelt about him, and I saw the flash of steel again and again as one and another of them lifted a knife and struck. I yelled aloud to them in my agony, and bade them wait till I came. So they hasted to make front against me, some of them leaping on their horses, and others biding a moment to put as it had been booty into their saddle wallets. It was Thomas Kennedy, called the Wolf of Drummurchie, that withstood me as I came thus furiously upon Dom Nicholas. With him I first crossed swords, while one, James Mure of Auchendrayne, held off a little warily, watching to win in at me when I should give him opportunity. With the corner of my eye I saw the same man whom I had at first observed making the warning signal. He held up his hand as before, then he leaped on a horse which he had by him in a hollow of the sands. He was, as I noted, a tall man, with a hat pulled low over his eyes, and he wore about him the long grey cloak which had been so fatal a sign to us of Cassillis. But ere I could see more, I was in the thick of the murderers with my sword. I struck and warded, not knowing what I did, but only striking with the anger of blood in my eye, till I gave Drummurchie a cut on the shoulder, which made him fain to shift his sword arm. Then I wheeled and attacked Cloncaird as furiously, who was a great mountain of a fellow, red of face and brutal of heart. And I had readily enough done for him too, had he been alone, for he was no man of his weapons. But I could see plainly enough 3 or 4 others charging pistols and training of hackbutts, making ready to take an aim at me. Whereupon I knew that there was no use of spending my life for naught. So, with my sword red in my hand, I rode over the sandhills straight at the tall man in the grey cloak, but such was the effect of an ill conscience that he took his mantle about his mouth as one that fears being known, and set spurs to his horse. I had not pursued far when I came to the top of a dune, and saw a little cloud of citizens that played at the clubs beneath me. To them I rode as hard as I could, with the murderers' bullets splattering here and there, and throwing up little spurts of sand about me. "Murder, foul murder!" I cried. "Come hastily, for the tutor of Cassillis is done to death." One of the citizens held up his hand to me as if to bid me be silent, for it was the putting stroke which his neighbour played, and of its kind difficult, so that men held their breath. But when it was made and the ball holed, they ran to me quickly enough, for alas, murder was so common in those days that men took little notice unless he that fell was one who was some kin to themselves. Nevertheless they hasted when I cried who was my master, and who were the villains that beset him. For the players were all burghers of Ayr, and feared that they should underlie the angers of the Earl and of the King, if they gave not ready help when this slaughter was done, as it were at their very gates. Thus very quickly we came to my dear master. He was lying alone on his back, quietly gazing up to the sky, the red blood welling from many ghastly wounds. All his rich plain Flanders cleading was torn and disarranged by the villains, who had not disdained to despoil after that they had murdered him. Yet there was some life left in him, and he turned his head, smiling as if thankful, after the hateful faces of his cruel enemies, to gaze at the last upon the countenances of friends. He was, as I thought, past speech, but he looked about him in a certain curious way he had when he had lost something, and being absent-minded, knew not for the moment what. I showed him his empty purse, but it was not that. So I looked round and saw nothing but some discharged pistols lying with broken lingels abroad upon the sand, and the little book he had been reading as his palfrey paced along. So as soon as I showed the latter to him, he put out his hand for it. Then he held it a moment, kissed it, and gave it back to me. "Be a good lad," he said quietly and composedly. "Fear not for me. I go in friendship with all men. Poor, poor Cloncaird," he said, thinking of one of his murderers whom he had always befriended. "It is a pity for his wife and young family." Then he closed his eyes, and we thought he had already passed from us. But presently he opened them again and looked toward me. "Be kind to Nelly," he said, smiling so kindly at me that my heart nearly broke. He shook his head at seeing my grief and the tears running down, for indeed I could not withhold them. "There is no need," he said reprovingly, "no need for the like of that, Ava. Be a brave lad, Launcelot, and just as true to your God as you have proved to me, who have been a loving master to you here below. I am only wae for the poor misguided lads that were so far left to themselves as to lay me here like this." And with that there was but his body on the sands, for the spirit of the gentlest master that ever a man served had gone its way to its own master. But it was even as he said, for the end of such an one there is no need of tears. Then I stood up, and the terrible thought came in upon me like Solway tide. How shall I take him home to Helen Kennedy, to his orphaned bairns, and to the stricken house of Culzean? End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 30. I Seek for Vengeance. Aye, well I might say it. How was I to face Nell Kennedy, she that had, with a long, kindly look, committed her father into my keeping that very morning? Tenderly we lifted the body which in life had been so noble and now was so pitifully mishandled. The villains had despoiled the dainty garmentry, torn the lace, and snatched the jewellery which Helen Kennedy had set in place as, daffing right merrily, she prepared her father, as she said, to gang worthily and bonnily before the King. But the King he went before was one, as he himself would often say, that looked not on the outer appearance but on the heart. And concerning that last, Thomas Kennedy need have had no fear that his would not be well looked upon. For it was upright and kindly and true, nor did it ever move to the hurt of any man in all this world. And as I took him up, I saw still more clearly the black-hearted rage of the persecutors. For it showed as manifestly as any other fact the hellish intent of the murderers, that they had taken time, even while I was in the act to come at them, to despoil my master of his purse with 1,000 merks of gold therein. Nay, his very ring of fine diamonds they tore from his finger, and his golden buttons of wrought goldsmith work were riven from his frilled sark, one murderous loon snatching one thing, and the other another, worse than brute beasts of the field. We laid him gently upon the back of wise Dom Nicholas, that all the time stood like a statue, and then, when everything was ready, moved graciously and soberly away, as though he had been well aware of the melancholy burden he bore. Even thus we brought my dear master to the sea terrace of Greenan, which he had so lately left. And when John Kennedy of Balterson heard the trampling of the horse on the flags of the court, he came out crying loudly and heartily, as was the manner of the man, "Weir, what's this, Culzean? Are ye back again?" So running to the door, he stood with his table knife in his hand, and a bit of his midday meal thereupon, astonished beyond the utterance of words. "What's this? What's this?" he cried. "Oh, sirs, what foul work is here? Wha has done this?" And I told him their names, at least so far as I knew them. "Thomas of Drummurchie," he cried, "it shall not be the uplands of Bar parish that shall keep ye frae the stark sword of John Kennedy of Balterson. And thou, Walter Muir of Cloncaird, that has so often sat in this house of the Greenan, by the grace of God I shall lay thee as low as thou hast laid my friend this day." But I begged Balterson to think of something else than the taking of revenge, of which all in good time. So presently he got me a horse litter with 2 steady-going beasts, and I walked alongside it with Dom Nicholas arching his head and treading softly as if he also mourned. Thus we came to the town of Maybole, which was our own place. And such dule and lament as there was that day saw I never anywhere. For the town had loved him as its liege lord, far more than either John, Earl of Cassillis, or his father the King of Carrick. Such a congregation as met us at the town gate. The women all crying the cry of death, the men cursing and calling vengeance. The minister was there to pray, and all classes and conditions were moved to tears. And ere we were well past the foul alley, there were 20 men on horseback to chase the murderers, with John Kennedy of Balterson at their head. But they might as well have chased the wind, for by this time, with the relays of horse that had been ordered for them, they were safe among the wild Crawford country on the borders of Kyle. Of the sad homecoming to Culzean itself I declare I cannot write at length. At the entering in of the woodland I left them, and upon Dom Nicholas I rode drearily forward to do the bitterest day's work of my life, to tell Helen Kennedy that I brought only her father's corpse home with me. And as the chance befell, it was at least half a mile before I reached the home gate of Culzean, just where one sees for the first time the great turrets sitting against the dimpled blue of the incoming tide, that I was aware of Nell Kennedy coming lightfoot towards me, singing a catch of a song and swaying a flourish of sweet may-blossom daintily in her hand. I have never rightly loved the white hawthorn since that day. But as soon as she saw me, she stopped her song and clutched her fingers close upon her palm, for the flowery branch had fallen at her feet. "What is wrong?" she cried, when I came near to her. But I could not answer till I had leaped from Dom Nicholas and taken her by the hand. She turned round, keeping me at the stretch of her arm, so that she might read the news, good or bad, in my eyes. "Is it my father? Tell me," she said very calmly. "Nell, it is your father," I said as quietly. "They set upon him and hurt him, even when he had sent me on a little way before him, that he might be alone at his midday meditation." "Is he dead? Tell me, is he dead?" she broke in. But I answered her not, for I could not. So she knew, and in an instant grew as pale and still as the man that was passed from us. "Take me to him," she said at length. And seeing that I still hesitated, she said, "Do not fear for me. I will do all that a daughter of Culzean should do." "They are bringing him hither now," I said. "I came hasting to tell you. The feet of the horses that carry him are even now upon the brae." Then, when I had told her all, I ended the tale with my tears and with crying out that which was in my heart. "Oh, would to God I had died instead of him!" "Launcelot," Nell said, with a wonderful quiet, "that is useless and not well said. Be comforted. None would have done 1/10 so much as thou hast." "Bless you, Nell," I said, for I had feared greatly she would have broken upon me with bitter railing. It was by the great oak tree which sends its boughs over the road that we met the bier and the horses stopped. Even thus Nell Kennedy met her father, and there was not a tear on her face, but only a great sweet calm. She silenced the noisy limmer wives that went behind crying and mourning aloud. So in this manner we went onward to Culzean, Nell walking on one side of the bier and I on the other, leading Dom Nicholas by the bridle. And lo, as the body passed the drawbridge, a sudden gust out of the sea snatched his knightly pennon from the topmost turret tower of the battlements of Culzean, which was held a fright and a warning by all the folk of Carrick. But though the master had come home to his own, yet both Culzean and I were now masterless. In due time we gave him stately funeral, carrying him forth upon a day so calm, so breathless, that the banners did not wave as they swept the dust. And thereafter all life seemed to stop, when we came home again to the darkened house. James and Sandy, the two young lads, played no more in the tennis courts, but went about with linked arms speaking of revenge. But little David abode with Nell, and went forth only with her, clinging winsomely to her hand, for we kept us close within bars and warded ramparts, with the drawbridge up, watching the fruit ripening on the walls of the orchard of Culzean all that splendid summer of the murder of our lord and master. Slowly I thought over many things, till the resolve to bring the matter to a head came masterfully upon me. From the Earl as Balsy of Carrick I got warrant, according to my dead master's word and direction, to be doer in ordinary for the young man James, who was now the heir of Cassillis. For Earl John knew that Launcelot Kennedy was no self-seeker. Also they that stood about had told to him the tutor's last words, that I was to be a good lad and to be kind to Nelly. It was Adam Boyd of Penkill and David Somerville, hosier and heir, who told him this, and they were two of those that played golf by the sandhills on the day of that foul slaying under trust. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 31. The Blue Blanket. Yet because I needed advice and had none to give it, I rode one day to Edinburgh to see Master Robert Bruce. I found the whole city in an uproar. There was the beating of drums in all the streets and closes, and a great multitude of the common folk crying out for God and the Kirk. Pikes danced merrily along the causeways, and good wives' heads were thrust through all the portholes in the windings of the stairs. Their voices, shrill and vehement, kept up a constant deafening clamour, each calling to her John or Tam to come away and oot o' that, or bidding them not to mell wi' what concerned them not. "What concern is the glory o' God o' yours, you that is but a baker in Cool's clothes?" I heard one wife cry to her man, and it seemed to me a mightily pertinent question. At last, after many inquiries, I heard how the minister of Edinburgh had bearded the king, so that he was gone off to Linlithgow in great indignation, and how that in a day or two Master Robert Bruce would either be King of Scotland or lay his head on the block. Yet the minister was in his study chamber when I went to seek him, reading of his Bible and writing his sermon, as quietly as though there had been no king in Scotland, save as it might be the king in whose interest he had so often bearded King Jamie Stuart, sixth of that name. Robert Bruce looked up when he saw me. "Ah, Launcelot," he cried, more heartily than ever I had heard him, "ken ye, lad, that you are likely to be at the Horn for communing with a wild rebel like me?" "To be at the Horn is no uncommon thing in Carrick," I replied, "and makes little difference either to the length of a man's life or the soundness of his sleep. I have been at the Horn ever since I was 18 years of my age." "Well, Launcelot," he said soberly, "so it has turned out even as I said. I know. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. But I see ye were all fey at Culzean." Then I told him the purpose of my coming all the way to Edinburgh to see him. "What?" he said. "Ye have never come so far only to have speech of poor Robert Bruce, that was yesterday minister of Edinburgh, and today is, I fear, doomed to lay his head on the hag clog." I told him it was even so, and that being the man of wisest counsel I had ever known, I would have gone 10 times as far to have his friendly advice. "Ay me," he said sadly, Way is the man that has such a rumour and report of wisdom, yet cannot counsel himself what he should do in his own utter need. But for all that he went over everything that had happened in Carrick, with a clearness most like that of a lawyer when he sets in order his case before the judge. Then he sat a long while silent, with his fingertips drumming idly upon his writing. "So Bargany is dead," he said at last. "He was the only considerable man of his own faction. Who is there to succeed him?" "But a child," said I, "one that plays with puppets." "As do we all, Launcelot," said Master Bruce, smiling on me. "And after him in that faction, of his own house and kin, who comes?" he asked. "There are none besides the Tutor's murderer, Thomas of Drummurchie, and Benane his brother, but he is a debauched man and of no account," I made answer, not seeing his drift. "Who leads them, then?" "John Mure of Auchendrayne is their only considerable man, and he has waxen great and greater within these months." The minister nodded his head and sat still as one that considers all sides of a question. "And of you that stand by the gold and blue, who remains?" he went on. I told him but John, Earl of Cassillis, and his brother, the Master. "And in whose friendship is the Master?" he asked. "In our country of Carrick he has an old friendship with Auchendrayne, and a good-going feud with the Earl, his brother, but recently he has taken up with the Lord of Garthland in Galloway and married his sister." "Tell him from me," said the minister of Edinburgh, "to bide close in Galloway and get him bairns in peace. For gin he comes back to Carrick, of a surety his head shall be the next to fall." "And why so?" said I. "Because," said Master Robert Bruce, "John Mure designs that there shall be no power in Carrick nor in the shire of Ayr besides his own and that of the Earl, till he get time to have him also killed. I tell you Auchendrayne hath the brains of any three of you." "And of the treasure of Kelwood, what?" said I. "That," said the minister, meditating, "is a little forth of my province. But if ye will know, I think it is in the keeping of some of Auchendrayne's tools. And I advise you ere ye look for revenge, to go seek for it." I was silent, for I hoped that he would tell me yet more. "The treasure of Kelwood will lead you to your aim. I think ye will find that the same hands which reft it away are red with the blood of your master. And one thing I am sure of, that within that treasure chest lie your love, your land, and your lordship." I asked him what he meant, but he would not tell me more clearly. "Only this," he said, speaking like them that have the second sight. "James Stuart being what he is, a treasure seeker, and John Earl of Cassillis being what he is, a treasure gripper, if ye find the kist, ye have them both in your hand. And therein, or I am a false prophet, lie, as I say, your love, your land, and your lordship." Then I asked him if he had any counsel to give me ere I went. "Be brave," he said. "Read your testament. Tell no lies. Carry no tales. Seek carefully for the man that wears the grey cloak, and then for the man that runs like a beast and carries the knife in his teeth." He went to the window as one that has spoken his last word. "Hear ye that?" he said. "That is the warrant for my heading." There circulated a great crowd of people without, apprentices and such like mostly, with here and there among them a decent responsible man of the trades. They were singing at the utmost pitch of their voices: "We'll hae nae mair Jeems Davison, Davy's son, Davy's son. We'll gie his loons the spavie soon, spavie soon, spavie soon. And the Deil may take James Davy son." "They might as well shear my head at once as sing that song," said Master Robert Bruce. "There is nothing that James Stuart likes so ill as to be called the son of Davy, unless it be the man who upholds the right of private judgment. Ah," he cried again, "the blue blanket! This waxes serious. I must put on my gown and sally forth." Then up the Cannon Gate there came a great crowd of citizens all marching together and crying, "God and the Kirk! God and the Kirk!" And in the midst there was borne the famous flag that has ever staggered in the front of a bicker, foretelling storms and the shaking of thrones, the blue blanket of the trades of Edinburgh. Robert Bruce drew his black Geneva gown about him, and taking his little Bible and his oak staff in his hand, he went out. As he stood forth upon his step, he was hailed with shouts of joy and rejoicing. And the blue blanket wavered and waggled, being borne this way and that by the press. All about the skirts of the crowd, and down the closes angry drums were beating, and 100 idle prentices thundered on great folks' doors and garred the window panes rattle on the causeway, which was a sin when glass was so dear, and to be seen in so few places besides the citizen houses of the great. "Men of Edinburgh," cried Bruce, "hear your minister. Wherefore this tumult? I bid you to depart quietly to your homes. We have a difference with the King, it is true, but let us who are the servants of God and of the Kirk of Scotland settle our own affairs with the King. What is your concern in the matter?" But the more he spoke of the King, the more loud grew the tumult. "God and the Kirk! God and the Kirk!" they cried, and the blue blanket waved higher than ever, being held up by one man standing upon the shoulders of other two. "Aye, aye, even so, it is a good cry," said the minister, "but it would set you better to be a little more ready to obey both God and the Kirk at other times. The most part of you know not for what cause ye are come together. Ye want to roll your minister's head in the dust." "No, no," cried the throng. "We will keep you safe, or know the reason why." "Depart, scatter instantly to your firesides," cried Bruce, "and so ye will the better serve the Kirk of Scotland and me, her unworthy servant." And with this he motioned to them with his hands, dismissing them. So great was his power that they went, scattering like peat reek on a windy day. In a minute or two there was not one of them to be seen on the street. The minister and I were left alone. "What think ye, Launcelot? Why stand ye so moody?" my companion said to me. I told him that I liked not much to tell him, that it was no fitting thought to tell a minister. "Say on," he said, "I have listed to strange speeches in my time." "Well then, sir," I made answer, "I was thinking what a pity to see so many limber lads with stark pikes in their hands, and nobody a penny the worse. I would to God I had them in Carrick. John Muir of Auchendrayne would hear news of it right briskly." The minister clapped me on the back. "Ah, Launce, it will be a strange heaven that you win to, unless you mend your ways. Ye are nocht but a wild Carrick savage. But ye maun e'en dree your weird, young Launcelot, and old Robert Bruce maun dree his. Fare ye weel." So we parted there on the steps of his own house, and with that I betook me to horse, and forth through the turbulent city that could yet make so little of its tulzies. And as I went I thought, Lord, Lord, for 1 hour of Gilbert Kennedy and me to show them a better way of it, or even Robert Harburgh. And it would be like capturing heaven by violence to enter Holyrood House in the way of Stouthreif and Spulsey. But I only thought these things without intent to do them, for I am a king's man and peaceable, besides which I had but lately spoken good words to a minister of religion. Nevertheless, what a booty would there not have been in that palace at the Canongate foot. Not that I would lay hand upon a stiver of it, even if I got the chance. But the thought of it was marvellously refreshing, I own. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 32, Greek Meets Greek. Then as I journeyed south, I saw my work set out like a perspective before me. As the minister had said, the treasure of Kelwood and the death of my master hung by one string. The house of the Red Moss was very near to the sandhills of Ayr, and there could be little doubt that the hand which had sped the bloody dagger was the hand that had brought my master to his death. As the drawbridge clanged down for me to ride once more within the house of Culzean, and lazy Gib stretched himself to cry that all was well, I took a resolve. It was to tell Helen Kennedy all that I knew, and ask her judgment upon it, though I have small notion, for ordinary, of women's discretion. So when the greetings were said I took my opportunity, and came to her when she was walking in the garden apart, where the apple trees grow. When she had heard all, she said, "Launce, you and I must ride to Auchendrayne." "Well," said I, "and what then? Shall we bid Grieve Allison have our coffins in readiness against our return feet first?" "We shall see my sister Marjorie," she said, without heeding my words, "and take counsel with her. They will not kill us within the house of Auchendrayne while she is alive." "I believe not that we shall even have the chance of speech with her," I replied, "but we may at least go and see. Whether we ever win back to Culzean is another matter." But Nell was mainly set on it, and I did not counter her, it being so that I was to ride in her company, for indeed I myself greatly desired to see the famous tower where dwelled a man so potent and so evil. The next day it happened that I went to Maybole and found mine ancient friend Robert Mure, Dominie and Session Clerk of the town. He sat gloomily in his school and bowed his head on his hands, for he had never looked up nor taken pleasure in life since they laid my master in the burying place of his folk within the kirkyard of Maybole. The school hummed about him, but he took little heed. His old alertness seemed quite gone from him, and when I came in he only lifted his head a moment and nodded, falling back again at once into his new melancholy. His pipes lay beside him indeed, but so long as I was there I did not see him recreate himself upon them, as had been his ordinary wont, playing pibrochs for his scholars' delectation at every pause in the day's occupations. "Dominie," said I, "there is one thing I want." "Say on," said he briefly, not looking at me. "I want speech with William Dalrymple, the lad that carried the letter to Auchendrayne the day before my lord's death." "Of what good is the like of that?" said he. "Will all the speech in the world bring back him that's gane?" "No," said I, going nearer to him and speaking under my breath, "but it may help us to his murderer." "Eh, what?" said the master, sitting up as gleg as a cat at a mouse hole. "His murderer, said ye? Are not Thomas of Drummurchie and Mure of Cloncaird his declared murderers?" "Ay," said I, "exactly, his declared murderers." "Speak either less or mair. Let us hae done wi' parables," quoth the Dominie. "What think ye," said I, "of the grey man that stood behind and waved them on like a pilot guiding a ship into a port? I mean the man that threw the dagger into the Red House. I mean the man that let loose the scum of the Tolbooth on us of Cassillis the day of Clear the Causeway." "And who might he be?" said the Dominie, breaking in upon me, for some of these things he was not acquainted with. "First bring in the laddie," said I. So Dominie Mure brought Dalrymple into a private place, and having dismissed the school, we proceeded faithfully to examine him. I asked him to tell me all that had befallen that fateful day, from the time I had seen him run up the Kirk Vennel, to the time when he came to me again upon the green at my play, and making a poor hand of it with another man's clubs. The boy began his tale well enough, like one that says a well-learned lesson. But in the very midst, when somewhat severely I bade him say over again what he had already said, he broke out into a passion of weeping and begging us to have mercy upon him, for that he was but a laddie and had been commanded upon pain of his death to tell the tale which he had told us at the first. So we bade him to speak freely, to tell no lie any more, and all would yet be well. So he told us how he had gone fleet-foot to Auchendrayne and had there found John Mure, the master thereof, sitting in the great chamber with Walter of Cloncaird. He described how that he had given the letter into the laird's hands, even as he had been bidden. When Mure read it, he handed it over to Cloncaird. But he, swearing that he was not gleg at the parson work, bade Auchendrayne to read it aloud for him. Which, when he did, they looked long and strangely at one another. And at last John Mure said, "I should not wonder, Cloncaird, but something might come out of this." Then the boy told how they had gripped him, set a naked dagger to his throat, and afterwards made him swear to take the letter back to them that sent him, saying that he had gone to Auchendrayne, but had returned without seeing the laird. "Say," said Mure, "that the servant bade you take back the letter unopened, because that his master was afield, and he knew not when he would be home." So concluded the boy, "Even thus I did. And this is all the truth, or may God strike me dead." The Dominie and I looked at each other in our turns. "The grey man himself," said I. "The black deil himsel'," said he. "We will exorcise him, black or grey," cried the Dominie. "I am going direct to the bailies and elders to tell them that this school has vacation, till it pleases me to take it up again." So he went out, and I waited alone with the boy William Dalrymple, whose rosy and innocent face was all beblubbered with weeping. I slapped him on the shoulder and bade him take heart, because he had found friends. Then I also told him that on the morrow he must come with me to the Earl of Cassillis, and by it might be to the King himself. "Will the Dominie come too?" the boy asked very anxiously. So when I told him that he would, he seemed more satisfied, and asked leave to go home to his mother. I had indeed something to tell Nell Kennedy that night when I rode home from Maybole. And upon the head of it we two sat long in talk, and were more than ever set on riding to Auchendrayne. But first we decided that the Dominie and I should carry William Dalrymple to the Earl, that he might certify to him what he had already testified to us at the schoolhouse in the Kirk Vennel. But on the morrow we, that is the Dominie and I, had it set to ride to Cassillis by way of Maybole. On the way we came to the little hut of the widow Dalrymple, for William was a town's bursar and so got his learning from the session as a poor scholar. The door was shut, and a neighbour's wife cried to us that both the boy and his mother had gone on to Cassillis before us. So we rode forward. Yet we must have missed them on the way, for when we came to the castle yet there was nobody there before us, and the Earl himself had ridden forth to the hawking by the waterside. Then came out to us foolish Sir Thomas Tode with his long story, which began as usual with the Black Vault of Dunure, and was proceeding by devious ways, when his wife came round the corner, whereat right briskly he changed his tune. And as I was saying, he said, on Tuesday 7 nights we had a shrewd frost that nipped the buds. "It is as well for you, old dotard," cried his wife, listening a moment. "I had thought ye were at your old tricks again." So we went in, and were busily partaking of the cheer of Mistress Tode, when we became aware of the noise of altercation without. "Save us," said the cook. "It is a mercy that neither my lord nor my lady are within gate, wi' a' that narration of noise outby. What can it be at a'?" And she went out to inquire. But if the disturbance was loud before, it certainly became 10 times worse when Mistress Tode disappeared. I got up to look, and the Dominie followed me. We saw a tall, grey-haired woman stand upon the causeway of the courtyard, with one hand on her hip, and with the other tossing back the straying witch locks from her brow. "Where's my boy, Mistress Tode?" cried the newcomer fiercely to our friend the cook, who stood upon the steps. "What hae ye doon wi' my laddie at the Black House of Cassillis? He left his hame to come here, by command o' my lord and young Launce of Culzean at 5 this morning. And Jock Edgar met him set on a pony between twa men on horseback, and he declares that the poor lad was greeting sair. What hae ye doon wi' him, ye misleared, ill-favoured Tode woman that ye are?" "Weel ken ye, Meg Dalrymple," cried Mistress Thomas Tode, "that I wadna steal ony chance-gotten loon o' yours. Faith na, I wadna fyle my purrit spurtle on his back. We shelter nae lazy gaberlunzie speldruns in the house of Cassillis. There is enough rack and ruin about the countryside as it is, withoot gathering in every gipsy brat and prowling night-hawk to its walls. Gin ye come here to insult my master, a belted earl, I'll e'en set the dogs on ye, ye gruesome ill-tongued limmer woman." I saw that this was to be altogether another kind of tulzie from those clattering bickers of the sword blades that I knew something about. So I signed to the Dominie to be silent, for here of a surety were two foemen worthy of each other's points. "Ye shall cast no stour in my een, certes," cried Meg Dalrymple. "I ken ye, ye old yelled crummy Tode. Ye hae nae bairns o' your own, and ye wad kidnap the bonny bairn o' a decent woman." "I dare say no. Nae bairns o' my ain," quoth she, cried Mistress Tode, roused to high anger. "I micht hae had as mony as a clocking hen gin I had gane the gate ye gaed, Meg Dalrymple. I'll hae the law on ye, ye randy casting up my man's infirmity to me." "Your man, quo' she," retorted Meg Dalrymple. "Ca' ye that auld bundle o' dishclouts tied aboot wi' hippens a man? Save us, one micht as soon bed ayont a pair of auld duddy breeks." "Ay, my man," cried Mistress Tode, "what hae ye to say, ye shameless woman, again Sir Thomas Tode, that has been Earl's chaplain for 40 year and my lawful wedded man for 10? Mistress Tode rang out the titles like a herald now, when her husband was gainsayed and made light of. But we know that on occasions she could treat him cavalierly enough. "I wad as soon marry a heather cow for soup in the rink at the Channel Staines," cried Meg Dalrymple. And this implication bit deeper into the feelings of the lady of Sir Thomas Tode than all the other reproaches, for the brush of tonsure hair was a sore subject of jesting with her, as I well knew. "I hae telled ye," Mistress Tode cried, pausing a moment with her hand on her side, as if to keep command of herself, "I hae telled ye, woman, that we only deal with kenned and authenticate folk in this hoose, no wi' orra loons that nae kens wha belangs them. And I would hae ye ken also that I am no to be named a liar by the likes o' you, Meg Dalrymple—me that has been keeper o' the larder keys o' this Earl's castle for 15 year, me that has had the outgiving of all plenishing, the power o' sitting down and on-putting, and never has been checked in a bottle's worth. Gang hame, ye Canaanitish woman, and I doot na ye'll find your brat safe in the town's bridewell. It will learn ye to bide from decent folks' houses making such a cry about your wastrel runnagates." "Keep your ill tongue for that disjaskit, ill put together rackle o' banes that ye hae for guidmen," cried the widow Dalrymple. "Weel do I ken that ye hae my bairn hidden away somegate amang ye. Sic a trade as has been hauden wi' a poor bit laddie for carrying a letter to the Laird o' Auchendrayne. And the like o' you stand in my road, Toad woman, you that is weel kenned in sax parishes for an ill-tongued gipsy. I'll hae ye proclaimed at the market cross, a lord's cook though ye be, gin ye dinna gie me hame my bairn wi' me.' 'Na,' said Mistress Toad more quietly, 'and you'll know. Ye'll e'en ask my pardon and gang quietly away to your hame by yoursel'.' 'And what is gone to gar me to that?' said Meg Dalrymple. 'Just me and this bonny wee bit mannikie here,' said Mistress Thomas Toad, turning round unexpectedly and catching the Dominie Mure by the arm. She pushed him forward and clapped him in a knowing way on the shoulder. 'Just this decent snod bit mannikie,' she said again. 'Woman,' said the Dominie, very indignantly, 'what have I to do with your quarrels and tongue thrashings?' 'Just this, honest man,' said Mistress Toad. 'Ye keep the session records o' the parish of Maybole, and if this ill-tongued woman disna gang home doucely and quietly, ye're the man that is going to gie me a sicht and extract o' them, under date 14th o' January, 1580 years.' The stroke told. Meg Dalrymple grew silent. The anger faded out of her face suddenly, as the shining on wet sea sand when you lift your foot. The warlike crook of her elbow flattened to a droop. For the session records of the Kirk of Scotland are the nearest thing to the books of the recording angel, and the opening of them is a little day of judgment to half the parish. But we could not let the poor woman depart in this fashion. I stepped to the door from behind the pillar where I had been listening for the ending of the fray. 'Mistress Dalrymple,' I said very quietly, 'your lad has never come to Cassillis at all. We came here to meet him. He must have lost his way.' 'Maister Launcelot,' said Meg Dalrymple in a changed voice, 'ye come o' a good kind hoose, and ye tell no lies. I am free to believe you. But my bairn is tinta the same. What will I do? Oh, what will I do?' 'Go home and bide quiet,' I bade her gently. 'I shall myself speak to the Earl. And fear not but we will find your lad, if he be in the land.' End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 33. The Devil is a Gentleman. But William Dalrymple was not to be so easily gotten. High and low he was sought for, but no trace of him was found. A girl had seen him taking the road to Cassillis with the dust rising behind him, as was his wont. For, as I have said, he was the best runner in the school of Maybole, and in the winter forenights he kept himself in fine practice with outrunning Rob Nickerson, the town's watchman. So on a day, since no better might be, Nell Kennedy and I rode out to Auchendrayne. At first we had trysted it to go by ourselves, but Dominie Mure declared that he would come with us, and wait in the hall if ye were asked to gang ben, as he said meaningly. For they might put you and the lassie awa, and never hear mair of it. But even John Mure and his son would think twice before they either sequestered or murdered the Dominie of Maybole and the clerk of the kirk session thereof. So, though his coming with us wearied Nell and myself somewhat, and hindered our discourse on the journey, it all turned out for the best in the end, as things that are bitter in the taking often do. I was, I will own, monstrously curious to see the Tower of Auchendrayne and the surroundings of it. For there were strange rumours in the countryside concerning gangs of wild savage folk that sometimes camped under the trees, and tales of horrid faces which might at any moment glower at you from the dark bole of a gnarled oak. But this fair sunshiny day we that rode saw nothing but the leaves rustling and clashing above us, and heard nothing but the sough and murmur of the Doon water beneath us. Auchendrayne is a place hidden among woods, set on a knoll indeed, but with trees all about it, not conspicuous and far regarding like the Newark or Culzean. When first we saw it, the great battlements looked pleasantly enough out of the greenery, basking as peacefully in the sun as though they had risen over the abode of some hermit or saint. We saw naught of the customary stir and bustle of an abbated house about the mansion of Auchendrayne. None ran to the office houses. None carried bundle nor drove cattle about the home parks. It was a peace like that of a Sabbath day. A black devil's Sabbath, said the Dominie grimly. And in truth there was something not altogether canny about thus coming to a dead and silent house, with the sun shining hot, and the broad common day all about and above. Nor even when we dismounted did any servant or retainer come forth to meet or challenge us. We did not see so much as the flutter of a banner or the gleam of a steel cap. Only there about us was the silent courtyard, with the heat of noon trembling athwart it, and the very paving stones clean swept like a table before the feast is set. I tied our horses to the iron ring of a looping-on stone, which stood at the angle of the wall by the gate, thinking as I did so that if only these foot-worn steps could speak, they could tell a tale worth hearkening to of strange venturings and bloody quests. Also I loosened my sword, and I think I saw the Dominie lay his hand to his hip, ere Nell and I set forward together. We went up the steps of the outside stair, and as we did so we came within hearing of a little continuous murmur of hoarse sound. The doors were all open, and I wot well that we walked softly and with our hearts in our mouths, for the silence and the strangeness of the deadly house of Auchendrayne daunted me more than the clash of swords or the crack of pistols. But I had Nell Kennedy by me, and I would have gone to destruction's pit-mouth for her sake, because saving my father and mother, she was the only friend I had. Suddenly in our advance we came to the door of a great hall, where at the upper end was a table in the midst. The windows were narrow and high, throwing down but a dim light upon the rush-strewn floor. There were many servants and others sitting in the hall, and at the further end stood one who read from a book. As soon as our eyes became accustomed to the cool duskiness after the white equal glare without, I perceived that the reader was none other than John Mure himself. About him there sat all his servants and retainers, both men and women. It was the crown of my astonishment to hear that the book from which he read was the Bible, and also that as he went on he made comments like a minister expounding his morning chapter, speaking very seasonably and fitly, and eke with excellent judgment and sense. Or so at least it seemed to me, for I am not enough of a clerk to be a judge of expositions, though my father has the 2 great leather-bound volumes of Clerk Erasmus his paraphrases on the shelf over the mantel. But though he is fond of these himself, he never rubbed any of his liking into me. But we were hearkening to the reading of John Mure in his own hall of Auchendrayne. "Fill ye up then the measures of your fathers," somewhat in this fashion he read from his place. "Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how shall ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes. And some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation." Having read this word, which, knowing what I knew, I had thought would have made him sink through the earth with the fear of condemnation, John Mure commented upon it, showing how it applied to such as refused the right gospel way and walked in devious courses, careless of God and man. Then he went on with his reading in the same clear and solemn voice, though he must perforce have seen us stand in the hall door. So soon as the reading was over, the great company of the retainers decently took their departure, walking out soberly and without hurry. Then came John Mure down from the dais with the Bible yet in his hand, and welcomed us with a condescension that was quaint and uncanny. "Ye have gotten us at our devotions, Mistress Helen, and you, Master Launcelot, and Dominie Mure, my good cousin. You could not have found us better employed." "Do ye believe what ye read?" asked the Dominie quickly. "Whatever is a means to an end, that I believe in, even as you believe in your taws and birch twigs. The reading of Scripture threatenings makes quiet bairns, and so does the birch." "What think ye of the blood of righteous Abel?" said the Dominie, with, methought, more boldness than discretion. "Will it cry from the ground, think ye?" The Laird of Auchendrayne looked at the little Dominie as one might upon a fractious but entertaining bairn. "It is a point much disputed. Ye had better ask our Launcelot's friend, Master Robert Bruce, Minister of Edinburgh, if perchance his head be yet upon his shoulders." Which saying showed me that John Mure knew more than I had given him the credit for. Then he turned to Nell. "You would wish to see the young Lady Auchendrayne," he said courteously. Nell replied coldly enough, "I should like to see my sister." "I think," said Auchendrayne, with a wiselike and grave sobriety that set well on his reverend person, "that she is presently in the orchard house." "Will you bide here, or will you go with Mistress Helen?" he asked of me. "We would all go together," said Nell, "if it pleasure you." So with a courteous wave of the hand he led us through stone passages and along echoing corridors, till we came to a door in the wall from which we entered upon a pleasant prospect of gardens and orchards. Here again there was the same curious silence, and, as it seemed, an absence of the twitter and stir of a Scottish garden in the season of summer. We came presently to a stone building like a tomb, all overshaded with trees. "This is the orchard house of Auchendrayne," he said. "I believe the Lady Marjorie is within." The Dominie and I stayed without with John Mure, while Nell went in alone to greet her sister. We heard the faint murmur of voices, and now and then a pulsing check as of a slow smothered sob. We that were without stood with our backs to the cold, heavy white stones under the green shade, while John Mure discoursed learnedly and pleasantly of flower beds and tulips and the best form of dovecot tower for the supply of the table with pigeon pie. At last Nell came to the door. "Launcelot, Marjorie wishes you to come in," she said, whereupon I entered and found a large room finished in oak panelling and moulded archings. Roses looked in at the windows, and a stir of pleasant coolness was all about. Marjorie was sitting by a table with many books spread upon it. My dear lady was pale and white as a lily. She leaned her head wearily on her hand, but there burned a still and unslockened fire in her eye. "Launcelot," she said to me, "this is not so wide a place to walk within as the pleasance at Culzean, nor yet can we see from the garden house of Auchendrayne the rough blue edges of Arran or the round haystack of Ailsa." I bade her look forward to happy days yet to come, for indeed I knew not what to say to her. She smiled upon me wistfully and indulgently, as one does upon a prattling child. "I thank you, Launcelot," she said, "but I was not born for happiness. Nevertheless, you were ever my good lad. I see you still wear my favour, but doubtless long ere this you have found another lady. Is it not so?" I told her no, blushing to have to say so in the hearing of Nell, who afterwards might flout me or, as like as not, cast up again the old matter of Kate Allison. Then through one of the windows I saw John Mure pacing up and down the path with the Dominie at the other side of the garden, so I knew that it was our time to speak. "Ye have heard of your father's death," said I. "What think ye? How was it wrought and how brought about? Can you help us to unravel it?" "Nay," said Marjorie, "not at present. But in good time I shall yet clear the matter to the roots, and that before I die." "Wherefore will you not come back to us at Culzean? We need you sorely," pleaded Nell, who stood holding her sister's hand. "Nay," said Marjorie, "my work is not yet done at Auchendrayne." It was the selfsame answer she had given when she rode away from the gate of Maybole on the day of the death of Gilbert Kennedy of Bargany. "Are they cruel to you here, Marjorie? Tell me that," I said, for I saw that the old laird was approaching, and that our further time would be but short. "No one of them hath laid so much as a finger upon me," said Marjorie, and this at least was some comfort to carry back to the sad house of Culzean with us. So with that, little satisfied concerning the thing which we came to seek, but with somewhat more ease in our hearts for Marjorie's sake, we went back through the passages and into the great hall. While we waited there for a servant to show us forth to our horses, my eye rested upon a large, closely written volume, with the quill pen laid upon it, and inkhorn set in a hole in the desk above it. "I see that my clerkly work has caught your eye," said John Mure. "It is a nothing that I amuse myself withal, yet it may live longer than you or I. It is but a slight history of the mighty sept whose name you, Master Launcelot, so worthily bear, with all their branches and noble deeds at arms. For me, I am but a useless old man, past the labour of fighting. Yea, I know it was your own lance that put me there. But I bear no malice, it was the fortune of war. You know me better than to suppose that John Mure bears a grudge for that shrewd thrust you dealt me on the day of the quenching of our hopes in blood by the gate of Maybole." I bowed and thanked him for his courteous words. "It was indeed the gallantest charge that was ever made," said I, "since that of Norman Leslie, when, on the day before Renty, he drava into the midst of 60 Spaniards with but 7 Scottish lances at his tail." "Sir," said I am no historian but a soldier. Yet is it a part of the training of a good fighter that he should know the great deeds which have been done in the wars before him by brave men, so that he may emulate them when he himself is launched upon the points." "It is well said, Sir Squire," said Auchendrayne, bowing to me. So with a courteous farewell, in which there was to be seen no grain of hate nor as much as a glint of the teeth or the wolf, he bade us go our ways. "And above all things," he cried after us, "mind your prayers. 'Tis a good lesson for the young to remember." Chapter 34 of The Grey Man. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeremiah Sutherland, Victoria, British Columbia. The Grey Man by S.R. CROCKETT. Chapter 34. In the Enemy's Country. Now, through being over-careful with my chronicle, I have spent too much time on our conferences. But we were indeed at the parting of the ways, and needed all advice. On our way to Culzean we met one who told us that the Earl had gone home that day to Cassillis. Nell besought me to ride thither, for she had a request to make to the head of her house ere she went her ways back to Culzean. So to Cassillis we rode, and at the gate encountered Robert Harburg, dressed as usual in his dark, close-fitting doublet, and with his long, plain sword by his side. With him I abode, while Helen went within to pay her duty in service to the Countess, who, as Nell told me afterwards, never stopped praising the ancient days when she was the Chancellor's wife, and had one of the ladies of the court to attire her. Now, she said bitterly, John grudges it if I take a milkmaid half an hour from the butter-kerning to help me arrange my hair. Presently the Earl came out. He showed himself well pleased and kind, as indeed he ever was with me, perhaps because I never asked aught of him in all my life. Helen, our cousin, said he, desires that she may go and abide among the heather with your good mother at Kirrieoch. What think ye of that? I told him that I had not heard of it, that she had spoken no word to me. See to the matter, he said with significance. I have been advised concerning Sir Thomas and his last words, and if you prove worthy, I know no reason why ye should not have the lass. But first ye must find the treasure of Kelwood or bring down her father's murderers, one of the two. And then, when that is done, I pledge you my knightly word that ye shall have both the lass and a suitable providing. Besides which, if I am in favour with the King, ye may even get a clap on the shoulder from the flat of a royal sword. But that, said he, I can nocht promise ye, for with King Jamie no man's favour is sicker. I told him that I kenned it not rightly if the lass would have me, that I never spoke a single word of love to her but what she lightlied me. In good time, said the Earl, smiling and nodding. The lass that wants in time of stress to gang and bide with the minnie will draw not unkindly to the son in times of ease. Then came Nell with a knitted shawl from the Countess to wear among the hills, for Earl John and she were kind folk enough in all that touched not the getting or spending of gear. I asked my lord also for the company of Robert Harburg to help me in the escorting of Nell fitly to the little tower of Kirrieoch on the side of the Minnoch water. Ay, ay, let him gang, said the Earl. The honeymoon is by, and his wife will be the fonder of him for lying her lane till he comes hame to her again. So Robert Harburg and his long sword went southward from Cassillis along with us, riding mostly with the Dominie, while I rode behind with Nell. I told her all our plans as we went, how we must seek the treasure, and how we must, above all things, find the boy Dalrymple. I will go with you upon your quest, the staunch little Dominie had said to me when he heard of our adventure. And so it fell out that we four rode steadily to the south till we came in the evening to my own hill land, where the whaups cry, where the burnies go chuckling to themselves and clattering over the pebbles, and where all the folks' hearts are kindly and warm. My mother took my lass in her arms when we told her our purpose and Nell's request. "And I will help you with the kye?" said Nell blithely to her. "Ay," answered my mother. "Ye'll help with the drinking of the milk, and that will e'en bring some roses back into your cheeks, my puir bit shilpit lassie." And though there passed not a look by the common between us when we parted, I think my mother shrewdly jaloused what were my hopes. Thus we left them standing by the lone dyke, the two old folk and Nell with her yellow hair a-blowing in the midst. And I, that knew not whether I might ever see them again, waved a hand, and resolved to return with a name and a barony at the least, or if my lot were perverse, to leave my bones in some stricken field. It is hard for a man to part from a lass, and in especial from one to whom he dares not make love as he has done to others, all because those others have told upon him, till he fears the ridicule of his real love more than rapier thrusts. Right bitterly did I regret that I had done my by-courtings so near home, because on my very life I dared not venture a sweet word to Nell Kennedy for fear of her saying, "That is even what you said to Kate Allison, the Grieve's lass." Or as it might be, "Keep to your customs. It is not your usual time yet by a quarter of an hour to put your arm about our waists." Now this is monstrously unfair to any man, who, after all, is compelled to conduct his affairs with some sort of rule and plan of attack. I was a fool, well do I know it. I ought to have gone further afield than the Grieve's house. I am sure there are plenty of lasses in Carrick fairer to look upon than Kate Allison, though I am free to admit that I thought not so at the time. So as we went back, it was arranged that Robert Harburg should ride to the woodland country about Auchendrayne, and there from his headquarters at Cassillis keep his eye upon the doings of the Muirs, because his person was unknown to them of Auchendrayne's household. The Dominie and I undertook the more uncertain work, but we had made our plans and were not to be put off. The neighbourhood of the Benane was well known to all that trafficked about the town of Girvan. It was a dangerous and ill-famed place, and many innocent people had very mysteriously lost their lives there, or at least disappeared to return no more. In order, therefore, that we might be more free to pursue our wanderings, we left our horses behind us. Indeed, Dom Nicholas was even now cropping the sweet grasses on the side of the Minnoch water, with my father to show him where they grew thickest, and my mother to give him oats between times, till the brave beast was in some danger of being overfed. As we neared Girvan, we came into a country of the bitterest partisans of the Bargany folk. Here dwelt James Bannatyne of Chapeldonnan, one of the great intimates of John Muir, and much beholden to him. Here also was Girvan Mains, over the possession of which much of the black blood had arisen. So for our safety we gave ourselves out to be plain merchants, travelling to Stranauer in order to get a passage over to Ireland. When we came to the farmhouses where we were to stay for the night, we always asked of the good man, in the hearing of his wife, concerning the state of the country. Was it peaceful? Were the bloody feuds staunched? And could honest men now live in peace? We heard, as was natural, a great deal of abuse of the Earl and of our faction, as the greediest and worst-intentioned rascals in the world. That from the goodman. But when the wife got her tongue started, she would tell us much that was no credit to Drummurchie and others on the side of the murderers. Soon we were fully certified that we were already in the country where Drummurchie and Cloncaird and the rest of their party were being secretly sustained by their friends. Yet we could not come at them, which perhaps was as well, seeing that my person was well known to them. I found the little Dominie a right brave companion. When we sojourned at houses, he had a way with the bairns that kept them on the trot to do his will, and pleasured to do it, a manner also of cross-questioning the parents about their children, which showed them his interest and his knowledge. Then he would most wisely and soberly advise them to see and give this lad Alec a good education, to make that one a merchant because of his cleverness with figures, and this one a dominie or a clerk, because he did not give promise of being fit for anything else. It was as good as a play to hear him, and made us much thought of wherever we went. Yet he was ready with his fighting tools also. Once when we went by Kildonnan, and a pack of dirty vagabonds bade us stand, what was my surprise to find that Dominie Muir, having laid down his pipes and out with his blade, was already driving among them, before I had got so much as my hand on the sword blade. And I am no laggard either, with the iron, as all may know by this time. But with his great bristling fierce head and his rapier that thrust up unexpectedly from below, yet which with the length of his arm reached as far as a tall man's, the Dominie gave the rascals a fright and a wound or two also, which started them at the run. Even then he followed, thrusting at them behind till they shouted amain and took across the fields to escape the pricking of his merciless weapon. And ever as they ran he cried, "Halt and deliver, did ye say? I will give you a bellyful of halt and deliver." End of chapter 34.
Chapter 35 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dylan Siedentoff, San Rafael, California. The Grey Man by S.R. Crockett. Chapter 35. The Ogre's Castle. So, being wearied with the chase, we went to the nearest farm, which, as it happened, was that of Chapeldonnan. It stood quite close by the roadside. A tall, large-boned woman came to the gate with a pail of pig's meat in her hand.
"What seek ye?" she said. "We want not travelling folk about Chapeldonnan."
We told her that we were merchants going to Ireland, and that we had been attacked by a set of rascals upon the way, whom we had made flee.
"They are no that ill in this part of the country. They would only ha' killed ye," she said,
as if that would have been a satisfaction to us.
"It is doon about the Benane that the real ill folk bide."
I told her that killing was enough for me, and that I was puzzled to know what worse she could mean. So, with some seeming reluctance, she bade us come in. The wide quadrangle of farm buildings was defended like a fortress. The gate was spiked and barred with iron from post to post, as though it had been the gate of a fighting baron instead of the yett of a tenant, devised only to keep in the kye. We asked civilly for the master of the house, and somewhat hastily the woman answered us,
"The goodman's not at home. He has been away o'er by at the crag trying to win the harvest of the solan geese and the sea parrots."
"Your husband is a tenant of the rock," I said, for it is always worth while finding out what a man like James Bannatyne may be doing, or at least how much he thinks it advisable to tell.
"Oh, aye," she said, "and a bonny holding it is. Gin it werena for the Ailsa, cocks, the conies, and the doos, it would be a millstone about our necks, for we have to pay sweetly for the rent o' it to my Lady of Bargany."
"But," said I, "it belongs to the Earl, does it not?" The mistress of Chapeldonnan looked pityingly at us.
"Ye are twa well put on men to be so ignorant. Ye mun ha' been long away for this part of the country, not to ken that the neighbourhood is very unhealthy for the friends o' the Earl of Cassillis to come here. Faith, the last that came spearing for rent and mails in this quarter got 6 inch of cauld steel in the wame o' him."
"And what," said the Dominie, "became of him after that? Did he manage to recover?"
Nah, he was buried in Colmonel kirkyard. The good man of Boghead gied him a resting grave and a headstone. It was thought to be very kind of him. It was Boghead himself that stickit him."
"Ye see what it is to be a Christian goodwife," said the Dominie.
"Oh, aye, lad," said the woman placidly. "That was generally remarked on at the time. Ye see, Boghead was aye a forgiving man a' his days. But for a' that, it was the general opinion o' the parish that the thing might be carried o'er far when it came to setting up my Lord of Cassillis's folks with graves and headstones."
She continued after a pause.
"I ha' been deaving at our goodman to gie up the craig, for it keeps him a deal from home. And I tell him that he carries away more than he brings back o' drink and victual. But he says that the rock is a maist extraordinary hungrysome place."
"It has that name," I said unwarily. She stopped and looked at me with sudden suspicion.
"What ken ye about the Ailsa?" she said, looking directly at me.
"Noctava," I replied, "but a seaside places ha' the name of making you ready for your meal of meat."
"Hoot, no," said Mistress Bannatyne. "Now there's meself. I canna do more than take a picking o' meat, like a sparrow on the lip o' the swine pot. Yet Chapeldonnan is but a step fra the sea."
She was at that moment lifting a heavy pot off the cleps or iron hooks by which it hung over the fireplace in the midst of the kitchen floor.
"I ha' aye been delicate in my days, and it is an awesome thing for a woman like me to be tied to a big eater like James, that never kens when he has his fill, like a corby hawking at a Broxy sheep till there was nothing left but the horns and the tail."
I thought we might get some information about the Benane, which might prove of some use to us when we had ventured thither. "Good wife," said I, "we are thinking of going by Ballantrae to the town of Stranrawer. The direct way, I hear, is by the Benane. What think ye?"
"Ye are a sonsy lad," she said. "Ye would make bra picking for the teeth of Sawney Bean's bairns. They would roast your ribs fresh and fresh till they were done. Syne they would pickle your quarters for the winter. The like o' you would be as good as a Christmas mart to them."
"Hoot, good wife," said I, "ye ken that a' this talk about Sawney Bean's folks is just blethers, made to fright bairns fra gallivanting at night."
"Ye'll maybe get news o' that gin Sawney puts his knife intil your throat. Ye ha' heard o' my man. James Bannatyne is not a man easily feared, but not for the Earldom of Cassillis would he gang that shore road to Ballantrae his lane."
And indeed, there were in the countryside enough tales of wayfarers who had disappeared there, of pools of blood frozen in the morning, of travellers' footsteps that went so far and then were lost in a smother of tracks made by naked feet running every way. But I kept on with my questions. I wanted to hear the brute of the country, and what were our chances. While we were thus cheerfully talking, and the Dominie by whiles playing a spring upon his pipes to gain the lady's goodwill, There came in a man of a black and gruesome countenance. We knew him at once for the master of Chapeldonnan, James Bannatyne, for he came in as only a good man comes into his own house. He was a man renowned for his great strength all over Carrick. He turned on us a lowering regard as he went clumsily by into an inner room, carrying an armful of nets. I noted that the twine had not been wet, so that his sea-fishing had not come to much. But behind the door he flung down a backload of birds, mostly solan geese and the fowl called the foolish cock of the rock, together with half a dozen taminories. So I guessed that he had either been over the water to Ailsa, or desired to have it thought so. His wife went ben the room to him. We could hear the sulky giant's growling questions as to who we were, and his wife's brisk replies. Presently she came out looking a little dashed.
"James has come in rather tired," she said, "and he will need to lie down and ha' a sleep."
"In that case, mistress," I said, "we will e'en thank you for your kindly hospitality and take our ways." She followed us to the door, and I think she was wonderfully glad to get us safe away without bloodshed.
"Be sure that ye gang no south by the Benane," she said. "The folk that bide there are no canny."
So we thanked her again and took our way, breathing more freely also to have left the giant behind. We had not gone far, however, when we spied her husband hastening after us across a field. He came up with us by a turn in the road. "We harbour no spies at Chapeldonnan," he said, bending sullenest brows at us, "and that I would have you know." "We are no spies on you nor on any well-doing man," I said. "We are honest merchants on our way to Stranrawer, and but called in to ask the way." "Ye speer o'er mony questions of my wife to be honest men," he said threateningly. "And why?" said the Dominie, birsing up as one that is ready to quarrel. "In this realm of Scotland may not a man without offence ask his way from the honest wife of an honest man, so long as he soliciteth no favour more intimate?" At this the giant made a blow at the little Dominie. He had a large cudgel in his hand, and he struck without warning, like the ill-conditioned ruffian that he was. But he fell in with the wrong man when he tried to take Dominie Muir unawares, for the little man was gleg as a hawk, having been accustomed to watch the eyes of boys all his life, aye, and often those of lads bigger than himself, so that, long before the hulking stroke of the fellow came near him, the Dominie had sprung to the side, and was ready, with his whinger in his hand, to spit Bannatyne upon the point. For myself, I did not even think it worth my while to even draw, for I had only brought my plain sword, fearing that in some of the company which our wanderings we might have to keep, the Earl's Damascus blade might overmuch excite cupidity. But instead I ordered the fellow away as one that has authority. It was not for Launcelot Kennedy to mix himself with a common brawling dog like Chapeldonnan. "It wants but the ticking of a straw," cried the little man, "that I should spit you through, like a paddock to bait a line for geds, and but for your wife's sake, who is a civil-spoken woman, by ill fortune tied to a ruffian, I should do it." Then, seeing that together we were overstrong for him, James Bannatyne took himself away, growling curses and threatening as to what should happen to us before we got clear of Carrick. However, we took little heed to the empty boaster, but went our ways down into the town of Girvan. Here it came to my mind to hire a boat and provision her, as it were, to go to the island of Arran, and nothing would set me till I had it done. So on the south beach we found a man cleaning just such a boat as we needed, with a half-deck on her and a little mast which could go either up or down. For 3 marks in silver we got the use of the boat for a month, and with her both suitable oars and sails. He was going to the haying in the parish of Kilmonnell, the owner said, but lest we should lose her, we must deposit with the minister or the provost of the town other 30 marks as the value of the boat, which money should again be ours when we returned to claim it. So to the provost we went, whom we found a hardy, red-faced man, a dealer in provisions and all manner of victual. Of these we took sufficient cargo on board, and having paid down our 30 marks, early one morning we laid our course for the Isle of Arran. But when we had gone screeving well across with a following wind, we lay to under Plata till it was dusk, and then with the breeze shifted to our quarter, we bore down on Ailsa. I knew not very well what we should find there, but I judged that we would at least come on some traces of the murderous crew, which might help us to clear up some of their secrets. For I judged that James Bannatyne did not spend his nights out of bed in order to wile a few solan geese off the rocks of Ailsa. End of chapter 35. Recording by Dylan Seaton-Tuff, San Rafael, California. Chapter 36 of The Grey Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dylan Seaton-Tuff, San Rafael, California. The Grey Man by S.R. CROCKETT. Chapter 36. The Defense of Castle Ailsa. Now the Isle of Ailsa is little more than a great lumping crag set askew in the sea. Nevertheless, it has both landing place and pasturage, house of refuge and place of defence. The island was not new to me, for I had once upon a time gone thither out of curiosity, after the matter of Barclay, Laird of Ladyland, who, in his madness, thought to make it a place of arms for the Papists in the year of the Spanish Armada, but was prevented and slain at the instance of Andrew Knox, one of the good reforming name, minister of Paisley. This last was a wonderfully clever man, and accounted a moving preacher, but on this occasion he showed himself a better fighter, which upon Craig Ailsa, at least, is more to the purpose. It was the dusk of the morning when we ran into the spit of shingle which is upon the eastern side, and, watching our chance, we drew the boat ashore. The sea was chill and calm, only a little ruffled by the night wind, and the sun was already brightening the sky to the east, so that the Bine Hill and Brown Carrick stood black against it. With great stealth and quiet we climbed up the narrow path, seeing nothing, however, save a pasturing goat that sprang away as we came near. It was eerie enough work, for the seabirds clanged around us, yammering and chunnering querulously among themselves on the main cliffs at the farther side of the isle. It grew a little lighter when we came out upon the narrow path which leads to the castle. Suddenly the dark door of the tower loomed before us, very black and grim. I declare it was like marching up to the cannon's mouth to walk up that little flight of stairs which led to the door in the wall. Nevertheless I clambered first, with a curious pricking down my back and a slackness about the knees. So all unscathed we entered. There was only emptiness in all the chambers. The castle had been almost wholly ruined and spoiled, for since its taking by the Protestant party it had not been touched nor put in defence. "Now I will bring up the provender. Keep you the castle," said I to the little dominie, as soon as we were certified that we were the first in possession. So I went down and made first one backload and then another of those things which we had bought at Girvan and placed in the boat. I brought up also all the ammunition for the hackbutt and the pistols. Before I had finished the sky grew grey and clear, the day breaking nobly with only a rack of cloud racing up the far side of Kilbrannan Sound to hang upon the chill shark's teeth of the mountains of Arran. Upon my return I was glad to find the castle intact, and the little man seated calmly with a book in his hand. "Did you never so much as shut the outer door?" I asked him. "And shut you without," said he. "Is it likely? You might have had to come along that footpad with only your limber limbs to keep your tail, and Tam a Dermurchy or Sawney Bean jumping ahint you." So before we went to examine the nooks and crannies of the crag for either enemies or treasure boxes, we resolved to put the castle in as good a state of defence as we could. First, we drew in the rough wooden steps which led to the door in the wall by which we had entered, so that only the little projections whereon the wood had rested were left to afford any foothold to a besieger. Then we closed and barricaded the door, for the huge iron bolt was yet in its place and ran securely into the stone of the wall itself for quite 2 feet. When the day finally broke, I went up to the turret top to look about me. "Save us!" I cried down to the little man. "Come hither, Dominie. Is not that our boat out there with men in her?" The Dominie ran up and looked long and earnestly. "Aye, deed it is," he made answer. "We are trapped, Launcelot, for all our cleverness. And if these chiels be our enemies, I doubt that we are as good as dead men in the jaws of the Wolf of Dermurchy." The men in the boat kept leaning back and looking up the cliffs as if to get sight of something. Sometimes they went completely out of view, as it had been close into the bulk of the isle, mayhap to examine more carefully some cave or lurking place. "We had better look well to our priming and set a watch," said I. "We shall have visitors this day at Castle Ailsa, or my name is not Lancelot Kennedy." But the hours passed slowly on, from 9 till noon, before we heard a sound, or saw a living creature beside the geese and the gulls. After the boat had gone westward out of sight, we waxed weary at our posts on the top of the turret. There I was, rooting and exploring, when I heard the Dominie whispering loudly to me to run up hastily into the tower. He told me how that a stone had come pelting against the wall on the side towards the hill. Now the castle sits on the verge of the precipice, and only a narrow path leads to it along the cliff. But behind there was a little courtyard to landward, now mostly ruined and broken down. It was from this side, so Dominie Muir whispered to me, that the stone had come. "Tut, man," said I, "you are losing your nerve with this playing of hide-and-seek. It was but a billy-goat's foot that spurned it, and so naturally it came bumming down the hillside." "Then," he replied grimly, "it was a billy-goat as big as an elephant, and it will ding over this castle into the sea, for no ordinary goat could have stirred the stone I saw. I tell you it popped over the cook like a cannon-ball." But we were soon to have company besides that of the stone. For presently there came in sight a man walking daintily and carefully along the path which led to the door of the tower. Now he would pull wantonly at a flower, and anon he would skip a stone over the cliff, for all the world as if it were a Sabbath afternoon, and he was waiting for his lass. But I knew better, for I heard his harness clattering under his loose coat of blue. "Where gang ye so blithely, my bonny man?" cried the Dominie suddenly from my elbow. The man started back and set his hand beneath his cloak, but the Dominie cried, "Keep awa your hand for your hip, young man. You may need it to preserve your balance on the footpath, and give me your attention for a wee." The man did as he was bid, and cast his eye aloft, where the black mouth of a hackbutt looked discouragingly down upon him. "Your name, friend?" said the Dominie. "I am James Carrick from the parish of Barr," said the man at last. Aye, slee Jamie, Drummurchie's man," said the Dominie with meaning. "When the man is pooing gowans and skiting slate stones, the master is no far awa. No, James, e'en turn you about and gang your ways, and tell your master that his black murder is found out, and that there are those on their way to this isle that will put the iron on his heels." So the man, who had called himself James Carrick, turned obediently about, and marched away the road he had come. Probably he had been sent for nothing more than to know if we had stolen a march upon them, and taken possession of the strength of the castle. They had our boat. There was no question of that. We were, therefore, set here with only 2 backloads of powder and provision to stand a siege in a small and ruinous tower upon a barren cliff. Nor was it long before we had news of the enemy, for as we strolled up and down the battlement walk, which is as common in such little fortalices, went round 3 sides of the tower, that is, round every side except that which looks inward to the cliff edge, a number of scattering shots came from all about, but chiefly from above. We could hear them whistling over us as we ducked our heads. We got ready our guns to fire in return so soon as a man showed, but the many boulders and rocky humps about gave the enemy great shelter, so that it was no easy thing to take aim at them. However, I did get a steady shot at an incautious leg, and on the back of the crack of the hackbutt came a great torrent of swearing, and this I took for a good sign. All we could do was to keep the little courtyard clear, and to shoot whenever we saw a bonnet rise up or a limb carelessly exposed. But we both yearned for something more lively to put an end to our suspense. Nor had we long to wait. From the east side of the tower, which looks to the sea, there came the sound of a loud report, a tumble of stones, and then a loud, continual, and most pitiful crying, as of a man hurt unto death. I ran up into the battlements above and set my head through a loophole. Beneath me lay a fine-looking young man, with his red bonnet fallen aside, clad in a short white coat, with doublet and hose also of red. He was unarmed so far as I could see. "Who are you, and what brought you here?" I cried to him from the turret loop. A massy cornerstone had fallen from the castle and lay on his chest, and a pile of other rocks and stones was heaped about his legs. He turned his eyes upward at me and tried twice to speak. At last he said, with many pants and piteous groans, "I am Alan Crosby, from Auchneil. I brought you a letter from my Lord Cassilis. I landed below and came up by the path, but when I got near I heard firing and saw the door shut. So I tried to clamber up the castle wall to cry in at the window to you, because you were my friends. And even as I climbed, the stones of the castle fell upon me, and now they are crushing the life out of me." "Where is the letter from my lord?" said I. The man cast his eyes about him as if to look for it. "I had it in my hand just now," he said. I saw a scrap of parchment a little way from him, and asked if that were the letter. "Tie it to a cord for me," said I, "that I may see it." But by reason of his wounds he was not able to reach it, and the stones pressed so bitterly on his breast that he could do nothing but lie and groan most wasomely. "Oh, help me, or else end my misery, for the love of God," he cried earnestly, "for I am at the point of death in this agony." I went all round the top of the tower and looked about every way. Our enemies had retired further up the cliff, and were contenting themselves with firing an occasional shot, which fell harmless against the walls, buzzed among the battlements, or else sang past us into the sea. I called the Dominie. "Come to the door," said I. "I cannot bide still and see that poor man suffer. He says that he has come with a letter from my Lord Cassilis. It may be so. I will at least go and see. Dormerchi's thieves have gone up the face of the rock, and the wounded man cannot hurt me much, even if he were willing." Then the Dominie pled with me to bide where I was, "because," said he, "you know not whether it be not an ambush." "I cannot let a fellow creature be crushed to pieces before my eyes and abide to hear his death cries," I answered. "Come down and hold you the door open." So with that I undid the bolts and put the Dominie behind it. I set my feet upon the jutting stones on which the wooden stair usually rested, and so scrambled perilously down, holding on the wall with my right hand the while. When I came to him, the lad was lying gasping on his back with the stones edgewise on his breast. I asked how he did. He seemed past speech, but was able to motion me round to the further side. There I stooped gently in order to raise the great block that lay upon his bosom. I stepped carefully about and turned my body to render him my aid as tenderly as I could. But I got a sudden and terrible surprise, and though I am not one much given to fear, I own that it shook my heart. Even as I stooped over him, the fellow flung off the stones as if they had been featherweights, leaped upon his own feet with a bended pistol in his hand, and stood in front of me, striding across the path which led back again to the castle door. At the same moment I heard a loud shout of warning from the Dominie that the enemy were again coming down the brae. I had no time to draw my dagger, and for greater lightness I had left my sword behind. I saw the rascal make him ready to fire at me, aiming at my heart. So I remembered the French trick of high kicking which Robert Harburg had once taught me, for he had been in France at the schools with his master the Earl, and had learned much there besides philosophy. So I gave the fellow my foot, shod with toe plates, full upon his wrist, which knocked the pistol up against his chin with a stunning crash. In the next moment I leaped at his throat and overbore him, spurning him with my heel as I passed. I can remember leaping upon him with all my weight from the top of one of the very stones the traitor had pulled down upon himself. Then I ran fleet-foot for the entrance of the castle. Others of the enemy were just coming about the corner when I reached the projecting points of stone. With my heart in my mouth I sprang up the little juts of rock. I was almost within and in safety, but I had not counted upon the swiftness and resource of my gentleman of the fallen stone. He was hard upon my heels in spite of the thundering clout he had gotten on the jaw from the pistol. But luckily my brave little friend the Dominie stood ready behind the door, and as soon as my hindmost foot was over the threshold, he set his strength to the iron handle and sent the massy oak home to its fastenings with such force that it struck the pursuer fair on the face with a stunning crash. As a stone is driven from a sling, so he fell whirling over the stair-head, and, unable to stop himself, he went, gripping vainly at the rock-weeds, headlong over the cliff. This, however, being behind the door and fully employed in securing it, we did not know at the time. But when we hurried up again to the top of the tower, we saw the enemy swarming down the cliffside to render him some assistance, or it might be to recover his body. "Ask him when you get him if he has another letter from my lord the Earl," cried the Dominie after him. "And serve him right well, the treacherous hound," muttered the little man to himself, "if you find him in pound pieces." But I said nothing, for I thought the fellow would mind the kick that I gave him. That night Thomas of Drummurchie and all his folk removed from the cave where till now they had dwelt. They went over in our boat and in that of James Bannatyne of Chapeldonnan to the mainland, being frightened, as I guess, by our declaration that there were those coming who would deliver them to justice, and also being dismayed, as I make no doubt, by our staunch and desperate defence. Thus we were left alone on the muckle weary rock which men call Ailsa, and which thousands of free men and women look at every day without a thought of the poor prisoned folk upon it. End of chapter 36. Recording by Dylan Siedentoff, San Rafael, California.